Hitler, Stalin, and Freud lived in the same neighborhood. In 1913, Vienna wasn't just a city, it was a storm quietly brewing in the heart of Europe. Picture this: the cobblestone streets are alive with the chatter of cafe-goers, the scent of fresh bread wafts from bakeries, and carriages clatter by under the watchful gaze of grand Baroque facades. But beneath this serene exterior, a bizarre and almost otherworldly coincidence was unfolding. Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Leon Trotsky, and Sigmund Freud were all living within miles of each other. Can you feel the weight of that moment? The air must have been thick with the unspeakable possibilities of history, yet unwritten. Close your eyes and step into a Viennese. Imagine them there, seated at separate tables, sipping dark brews, immersed in their own lives. Freud might be puffing on a cigar, scribbling notes about the human psyche, while a young, frustrated Hitler sketches feverishly in the corner, his future atrocities mere whispers in his mind. Across the room, Stalin, under the guise of a revolutionary exile, keeps his eyes low, but his ears open, eavesdropping on conversations for signs of political dissent. And Trotsky? Perhaps he's penning a fiery manifesto or passionately debating Marxism with a comrade over steaming cups of tea. It's almost too surreal to believe. Four men whose paths would shape and scar the 20th century, unknowingly orbiting one another in this small slice of the world. What are the odds? What are the implications? The mind races with questions. Did their shadows ever cross? Did Freud ever lock eyes with the young Hitler and sense something sinister simmering beneath the surface? Did Trotsky and Stalin exchange glances, neither suspecting the brutal betrayal that would one day define their relationship? Did their lives brush against one another like strangers passing on the street? Or did they remain invisible to each other, separated by the vast gulf of what was yet to come? The haunting beauty of this paradox lies in its sheer ordinariness. For all their infamy, at that moment, they were just people, each one, in their own way, trying to carve out meaning in a world teetering on the edge of chaos. Freud was refining his theories, peeling back the layers of the human mind. Hitler, a failed artist, was drowning in rejection and bitterness. Stalin, still far from his iron-fisted rule, was laying low, blending into the bustling immigrant crowd. Trotsky was writing passionately, his heart on fire for revolution. But here's the twist. Each of these men would eventually go on to wield immense power over nations, over ideologies, over the collective psyche of millions. They would define the nightmares and breakthroughs of a century. Yet, in 1913, they were nobodies. They were just neighbors. Think about it. What if they had met? What if Freud had psychoanalyzed Hitler, unraveling his festering rage before it could metastasize into genocide? What if Trotsky and Stalin had hashed out their ideological differences over coffee, averting the schism that would tear apart the communist movement? What if the right conversation, the right moment, could have changed everything? But that's the cruel trick of history, isn't it? We only see its pivotal moments in hindsight. In the present, they're just mundane details, faces in a crowd, shadows on a wall. Freud wasn't thinking about Hitler or Stalin. Trotsky wasn't wondering if his future assassin was walking the same streets. They were living their lives, oblivious to the tectonic shifts that were about to erupt from the ground beneath them. And here you are, standing on the other side of that history, knowing exactly what would come next. The wars, the revolutions, the suffering. You can't help but wonder how many of today's dictators, visionaries, or thinkers are quietly passing one another on crowded streets, caught up in their own struggles, unaware of the roles they're about to play on the world stage. The Paradox of Vienna in 1913 isn't just a historical oddity. It's a mirror, reflecting how proximity doesn't always lead to connection, and how the mundane can silently carry the seeds of the extraordinary. It's a reminder that history isn't written in bold, dramatic strokes, but in the quiet, intersecting lives of people who don't yet know they're about to change the world. The Great Emu War. Humans lost to birds. In 1932, the Australian outback became an unlikely battlefield. The enemy? Emus, towering, flightless birds with a knack for survival and a disregard for human authority. It sounds like the setup for a bad joke, doesn't it? But this was real. Australia declared war on emus, armed soldiers with machine guns, and marched out to conquer the birds. The result? Humankind lost, utterly and embarrassingly. Picture it: a dry, sun-scorched landscape stretching as far as the eye can see. The farmers of Western Australia are desperate. The emus, nearly 20,000 strong, have invaded their fields, devouring crops and trampling fences. It's not just a nuisance, it's a disaster. The farmers plead with the government for help, and the response is as dramatic as it is absurd. Send in the military. Enter the soldiers armed with Lewis machine guns, ready to assert humanity's dominance. At first, you might think, how hard can it be? They're just birds. But emus are no ordinary birds. They're fast, agile, and cunning. They can sprint up to 50 kilometers an hour and pivot like feathered ninjas. They travel in groups, watching out for one another, and scatter unpredictably at the first sign of danger. The first skirmish begins with high hopes. Soldiers set up their guns, take aim at a flock, and fire. The emus scatter, darting in every direction like feathery whirlwinds. The bullets barely graze them. Soldiers are left stunned, chasing shadows. Over the following days, the war descends into chaos. Ambushes are set, machine guns mounted on trucks, and yet the emus continue to outsmart their human adversaries. The trucks, bouncing over uneven terrain, make it impossible to aim. The emus, with their serpentine necks and unrelenting speed, weave through the gunfire like it's a game. And the emus, they fight back in their own way. They destroy fences, ravage crops, and mock the soldiers with their very survival. One commander later remarked that the emus seemed almost bulletproof, their thick feathers and rapid movements rendering the military's firepower laughably ineffective. By the end of the campaign, the soldiers had fired over 2,500 rounds of ammunition. The official tally? A mere handful of emus downed. The rest escaped, regrouped, and continued their feathery reign of terror. The military was forced to retreat, humiliated. The emus had won, leaving the government to abandon its war efforts and return control to the farmers. You might laugh at the absurdity of it all, but this paradox is more than just a quirky historical anecdote. It's a reflection of human hubris, the belief that with enough firepower, ingenuity, or sheer determination, we can conquer anything. Yet here, nature proved otherwise. The emus were faster, smarter, and better adapted to their environment. No amount of human planning could outwit their instincts. Think about it. A nation's military, armed with cutting-edge weaponry, was defeated by birds. It's both humbling and hilarious. But beneath the humor lies a lesson. Not every battle can be won with brute force. Sometimes nature isn't something to be dominated. It's something to adapt to coexist with. The Great Emu War also reveals the unintended consequences of our actions. The emu problem itself was a result of humans disrupting the natural balance. The birds, displaced from their habitats by expanding farmland, were merely doing what they'd always done, surviving. The war wasn't just a failure of strategy, it was a failure to understand the complexity of the ecosystem. And yet, there's something oddly poetic about the emu's victory. It's a reminder that even in the face of human arrogance, nature has a way of asserting itself. It's as if the emus were saying, "You don't own this land. We were here first." So, the next time you're tempted to underestimate the resilience of nature or overestimate the power of human ingenuity, remember the emus. They outran machine guns, outmaneuvered soldiers, and turned an entire war into a punchline. The Great Emu. War wasn't just a defeat for Australia's military. It was a victory for the untamed spirit of the natural world. In the end, the lesson is simple, yet profound. Sometimes the fight isn't worth picking, and sometimes the underdog, or underbird, wins. And isn't that a paradox worth savoring? Napoleon was once attacked by a horde of bunnies. Napoleon Bonaparte, conqueror of Europe, feared general, and master strategist, brought to his knees by bunnies. Yes, you read that right. The same man who orchestrated brilliant military campaigns found himself in the most ridiculous of predicaments, fleeing from a relentless rabbit army. Picture it. It's the early 1800s, and Napoleon, basking in his glory, decides to treat his men to a day of leisure. A rabbit hunt seems like the perfect way to relax and show off his dominance, not just over nations, but over nature itself. Orders are sent, preparations made, and his men gather what they think are thousands of wild rabbits for the event. But here's the twist. They didn't catch wild rabbits. They brought tame, well-fed, and highly socialized rabbits, likely purchased from farmers who raised them in droves. And when the moment came to release them, Napoleon and his entourage expected a scene straight out of a pastoral painting, rabbits darting off into the fields as hunters pursued them with sport and laughter. Instead, chaos erupted. As the cages were opened, the rabbits didn't scatter in fear. They didn't even hesitate. Like a tiny, furry army, they charged straight at Napoleon. At first it was funny. Imagine the emperor chuckling as a few curious bunnies hopped toward him. But then more came, and soon it wasn't just a few rabbits. It was an unstoppable wave of fur and ears, surging toward Napoleon with an inexplicable determination. The emperor's men tried to intervene, swatting and shooing the rabbits away, but it was useless. The rabbits weren't intimidated. These weren't wild creatures acting on instinct. They were tame rabbits, used to associating humans with food. And in their bunny brains, Napoleon wasn't a hunter. He was a walking buffet. The scene quickly turned from amusing to absurd. Napoleon, the man who had faced down armies and overthrown monarchies, was forced to retreat. He ran, trying to evade the swarm of bunnies. His soldiers, baffled and helpless, watched as their emperor climbed into his carriage, desperately seeking refuge. But even that wasn't enough. The rabbits, undeterred, launched themselves at the carriage, some even scrambling aboard in their relentless pursuit. The mighty Napoleon, conqueror of Europe, had no choice but to flee the battlefield of bunnies. This story, as absurd as it sounds, isn't just a comedic footnote in history. It's a paradoxical reminder of the unpredictable nature of power. Napoleon, who had crushed armies and brought nations to their knees, was utterly powerless against a force he never anticipated. It wasn't muskets or cannons that defeated him that day. It was the collective determination of hungry rabbits. And doesn't that say something about the fragility of human dominance? We spend so much time trying to control the world around us, convinced of our own strength, only to be reminded, often in the most unexpected ways, that nature doesn't play by our rules. The rabbits weren't malicious or strategic. They simply saw an opportunity and seized it, oblivious to the grandeur or authority of the man before them. But there's something poetic in that absurdity. Napoleon's encounter with the bunnies is a humbling tale, a reminder that no matter how powerful or prepared we think we are, life has a way of surprising us. Sometimes it's not the grand battles or the formidable foes that trip us up. It's the small, unexpected moments that turn the tide. So the next time you feel unstoppable, invincible, or untouchable, remember Napoleon and the rabbits. Remember how even the greatest of leaders can find themselves outmaneuvered by the simplest of creatures. And remember that sometimes the universe has a sense of humor, and it comes with a twitching nose and a fluffy tail. The Eiffel Tower can grow in the summer. The Eiffel Tower, icon of romance, architectural marvel, and symbol of Paris, has a secret. It's not as unyielding as it looks. In fact, this 324-meter iron giant is alive in its own way, stretching upward like a sun-loving plant during the summer months. Yes, the Eiffel Tower can actually grow. It sounds impossible, doesn't it? A massive iron structure, the very definition of immovable, expanding by up to 15 centimeters, 6 inches, just because of the heat. But the explanation lies not in magic, but in science, a process so subtle yet profound that it can make the unshakable tower seem almost human. Here's how it works. On warm summer days, when the sun beats down on the iron lattice, the metal heats up and begins to expand. Iron atoms, energized by the rising temperature, move just a little farther apart. It's a tiny shift, barely noticeable in each individual piece of metal. But when multiplied across the 18,038 iron parts that make up the tower, the result is a significant change. The entire structure stretches upward, defying gravity with its newfound height. And just as the tower grows in the summer, it shrinks back down in the cold of winter. When temperatures drop, the atoms lose their energy, huddling closer together like Parisians pulling their coats tighter against the chill. The Eiffel Tower contracts, returning to its original height, as if it's retreating from the world to rest. It's a paradox, isn't it? A structure so monumental, so seemingly eternal, quietly shifting with the seasons. It reminds you that even the most solid things in life aren't truly static. The world is always moving, always changing, even when you think it isn't. But there's something poetic in this subtle growth. The Eiffel Tower, so often associated with romance and love, becomes a metaphor for adaptability and resilience. It doesn't resist the heat or fight the cold. It simply changes, expanding and contracting as the seasons demand. It thrives not by standing firm, but by embracing transformation. Think about that for a moment. How often do we try to resist change, clinging to our routines and certainties, afraid of what growth might require? And yet, here's the Eiffel Tower, teaching us that even the grandest things are not fixed. Growth is natural. Change is inevitable. The tower's summer growth is also a reminder of the quiet power of nature. No matter how impressive human engineering might be, it's still subject to the forces of the earth, heat, cold, and time, All of them shape the Eiffel Tower, just as they shape everything else. Imagine standing beneath the Eiffel Tower on a scorching summer day, the sun glinting off its iron frame. You might not see it growing, but you know it's happening. Slowly, imperceptibly, it reaches upward, becoming something slightly more than it was before. And in the winter, when frost coats its beams, it settles back down, content to wait for the warmth to return. The Eiffel Tower's seasonal growth isn't just a quirky fact, it's a reflection of life itself. It's a reminder that even the strongest, most enduring things are in a constant state of change. And it's an invitation to embrace that change, to grow when the world calls for it, and to rest when it's time to pause. So the next time you see the Eiffel Tower, whether in person or in a picture, think of it not as a static monument, but as a living lesson in adaptation, because sometimes even giants need a little room to grow. Cleopatra lived closer to the moon landing than the pyramids. Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt, has always felt like a figure from the ancient past, a woman intertwined with pyramids, pharaohs, and the mysteries of antiquity. But here's a truth that will bend your perception of history. Cleopatra lived closer in time to the moon landing than to the construction of the pyramids of Giza. Let that sink in. The pyramids, those colossal wonders of engineering, were already ancient relics by the time Cleopatra ruled. By the time she walked the sands of Egypt, wearing her crown and captivating Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, the pyramids had stood for 2,500 years. They were as much a relic of a bygone age to Cleopatra as she is to us today. Now fast forward from Cleopatra's death in 30 BCE to 1969 CE, just under 2,000 years. Humanity had not only mapped the Earth, but left its atmosphere, traveled 384,400 kilometers through the void, and set foot on the moon. Cleopatra's reign feels impossibly distant, yet it is closer to Neil Armstrong's historic giant leap for mankind than to the completion of the Great Pyramid. It's almost disorienting, isn't it? History tends to collapse in our minds, lumping together all that came long ago into a singular, vague past. Cleopatra and the pyramids, together in the same mental image, ruling over a mystical Egypt frozen in time. But history isn't static. It's a long, sprawling tapestry, and Cleopatra's thread is far closer to our modern world than to the world that built the pyramids. Imagine Cleopatra herself standing on the banks of the Nile, gazing at the pyramids. To her, they weren't symbols of her reign. They were echoes of a time long gone, built by a civilization whose traditions she inherited, but whose origins must have felt distant, even alien. The Great Pyramid of Giza, the largest and most famous, was already weathered and worn by the time she was born. Its builders lived in a world without iron tools, where wooden sleds dragged stone blocks weighing tons across the desert. To Cleopatra, their methods might have seemed as mysterious as they are to us today, and yet Cleopatra's world wasn't so far removed from our own. She spoke multiple languages, ruled with political acumen, and engaged in complex alliances and wars that shaped her era. She lived in a globalized world of trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. The Alexandria of her time housed the Great Library, a center of learning that sought to collect all human knowledge, a pursuit not so unlike our modern internet. But the leap from Cleopatra to the moon landing is almost incomprehensible in its scale. In her time, the limits of exploration were the deserts, seas, and rivers of Earth. The idea of leaving the planet altogether would have seemed like madness, or perhaps the work of the gods. And yet, Just 2 millennia later, human ingenuity had reached beyond Earth's boundaries, carrying not pyramids, but spacecraft into the heavens. This paradox isn't just about timelines, it's about perspective. It's a reminder that history is not a linear march from ancient to modern, but a complex web of moments, connections, and leaps. It reminds us that the world of Cleopatra was not a stagnant ancient past, but a living, breathing reality, just as dynamic and forward-looking as our own. And maybe that's the real lesson here. History is closer than we think. The pyramids, Cleopatra, the moon landing, they're not distant, disconnected points on a timeline. They're part of the same story, a story of humanity's relentless drive to build, to explore, to leave something behind. So the next time you think of Cleopatra, don't picture her as the queen of the pyramids. Picture her as a bridge, a connection between the deep past and the modern age. Picture her looking up at the stars, unaware that one day humans would reach for them, just as her ancestors once reached for the heavens with stone. Cleopatra isn't ancient history. She's part of the story that's still unfolding. Ancient Romans used urine as mouthwash. Imagine waking up in ancient Rome. The sun filters through the colonnades, merchants call out in the bustling streets, and the air smells of fresh bread from the bakeries. You shuffle to your wash basin, ready to start your morning routine. But instead of reaching for toothpaste or a minty rinse, you grab a jar of urine. Yes, human urine. And no, this isn't a punishment. It's your mouthwash. Unbelievable? Perhaps. But to the Romans, it was perfectly practical. They believed that the ammonia in urine, a natural cleaning agent, could whiten teeth and freshen breath. It wasn't just a theory, it was a widely practiced ritual. In fact, Roman society held urine in such high regard that it became a valuable commodity, taxed by none other than Emperor Vespasian himself. Yes, you heard that right. Urine was taxed. Collectors would gather it from public latrines, sell it to laundries, tanneries, and yes, even individuals looking to brighten their smiles. The process was so normalized that people barely batted an eye. After all, what's a little bodily fluid when it comes to maintaining your pearly whites? But before you cringe too hard, let's dig into the science. Ammonia, a compound naturally found in urine, is a powerful cleaning agent. It neutralizes odors, breaks down stains, and even has antibacterial properties. The Romans didn't have a chemical lab to explain this, but they knew it worked. To them, the proof was in the results: whiter teeth, fresher breath, and, presumably, a confident smile. Of course, this raises some questions. Who was the first person to think, you know what would really clean my teeth? Pee. Was it a desperate experiment or a well-kept secret passed down through generations? We may never know, but it's safe to say that the Romans were nothing if not resourceful. Urine's use wasn't limited to dental hygiene either. It played a crucial role in Roman daily life. Launderers used it to clean clothes, soaking garments in vats of urine to remove stains before scrubbing them clean. Tanners used it to soften animal hides. It was so integral to industry and hygiene that the urine tax became a significant revenue source. And Vespasian, ever the pragmatist, reportedly defended it with a famous phrase, "Money does not stink." But for all its practicality, the idea of using urine as mouthwash still feels jarring today. It's a stark reminder of how different cultural norms and scientific understanding can be across time. What was perfectly acceptable in ancient Rome would make even the boldest influencer hesitate before recommending it on Instagram. Yet, there's something strangely admirable about the Romans' approach. They didn't waste resources. They found value in things most of us would throw away without a second thought. In their world, even urine, something we now flush away without a second thought, was a tool for cleanliness, industry, and even beauty. So the next time you brush your teeth, think about the Romans. Think about their ingenuity, their practicality, and yes, their questionable taste in dental hygiene. And maybe, just maybe, take a moment to appreciate the minty freshness of modern toothpaste. Because if nothing else, the Romans remind us that progress is often messy, weird, and a little gross, but it's also driven by the same timeless desire to look good, feel good, and make the most of what we have, even if it's something as unthinkable as a jar of pee. The CIA tried to train cats as spies. In the 1960s, at the height of Cold War paranoia, the CIA hatched a plan so bizarre it sounds like something out of a spy parody. They tried to turn cats into covert operatives. Yes, you heard that right, cats. Fluffy, aloof, tuna-loving felines were to become the eyes and ears of American intelligence. This wasn't a joke or a brainstorming session gone wrong. It was a real, multi-million-dollar project called Acoustic Kitty. The idea, in theory, wasn't completely ridiculous. Cats are quiet, agile, and can slip into places unnoticed. The CIA believed they could exploit these traits by surgically implanting listening devices into cats, transforming them into living surveillance tools. The plan was to release these feline agents near Soviet embassies and have them eavesdrop on conversations, transmitting the intel back to their handlers. But if you've ever owned a cat, you probably already see the flaw in this plan. Cats don't follow orders. They don't care about your agenda, and they certainly don't care about geopolitics. The CIA, however, was undeterred. They spent years developing the technology and refining the procedures. Surgeons implanted a microphone into a cat's ear canal, a transmitter in its body, and a wire running along its spine to the tail for an antenna. It was delicate work, pushing the limits of both science and ethics. When the first acoustic kitty was finally ready, it wasn't just a cat. It was a Cold War marvel, a furry James Bond. But then came the field test and reality hit. Literally. The CIA released their first spy cat in a park near a Soviet compound, ready to intercept sensitive conversations. The cat, unaware of its mission and unimpressed by the grandeur of espionage, did what cats do. It wandered off. Before it could even get close to the target, it was struck by a car. Years of research and millions of dollars ended in an instant, leaving nothing but disbelief and a very dead spy cat. The project was quietly scrapped, and Acoustic Kitty became a cautionary tale in the annals of intelligence history. The CIA eventually admitted that while the idea was technically feasible, cats' independence made them entirely unreliable as spies. In short, the CIA learned the hard way what cat owners have always known. You don't train a cat trains you. It's easy to laugh at the absurdity of it all. The image of CIA operatives seriously discussing feline espionage, the thought of a cat sitting in a boardroom with a little wire poking out of its tail, it feels like satire. But beneath the humor lies a deeper truth about the lengths to which humans will go in pursuit of control, even when it borders on the absurd. Acoustic Kitty wasn't just a failure of practicality. It was a failure of hubris. It was the belief that technology could bend nature to our will, that the independent spirit of a cat could be subdued by a microphone and a mission briefing. It was a reminder that no matter how advanced our tools become, the natural world has its own rules, and cats, in particular, don't care about ours. And yet there's something strangely endearing about the project. It speaks to the boundless creativity and determination of the human spirit, even when it veers into the ridiculous. The same ingenuity that sent people to the moon also tried to send cats into the shadowy world of espionage. So the next time you see your cat lounging on the couch, staring out the window like it knows something you don't, remember Acoustic Kitty. Remember that once the CIA believed your lazy, aloof companion could change the course of history. And while the mission may have failed, the story lives on as proof that sometimes the world's most serious endeavors can take the most hilariously unexpected turns. A woman survived both atomic bombs. Imagine standing at ground zero of one of history's most devastating moments, the blinding light, the deafening roar, and the unfathomable destruction of an atomic bomb. Now imagine surviving it, only to face the same horror 3 days later. This is the astonishing, almost incomprehensible story of Tsutomu Yamaguchi, a man who endured not one, but both atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki during World War II. On August 6, 1945, Yamaguchi was in Hiroshima on a business trip. It was an ordinary day until it wasn't. The Enola Gay dropped its payload, and the world's first atomic bomb detonated above the city. In an instant, the sky turned white, buildings crumbled, and a fiery inferno consumed everything in its path. Yamaguchi, just 3 kilometers from the blast's epicenter, was thrown to the ground. His body burned, his eardrums ruptured, and yet, against all odds, he survived. Staggering through the charred remains of Hiroshima, he managed to find shelter and eventually began his journey home to Nagasaki. Burned and battered, he could hardly have imagined that his nightmare was far from over. 3 days later, on August 9th, Yamaguchi was in Nagasaki, recounting the horrors of Hiroshima to his colleagues when the second bomb, Fat Man, exploded. Once again, the sky turned to fire, the earth shook, and devastation swept the city. And, once again, Yamaguchi survived. The sheer improbability of his story defies belief. To witness one atomic bombing is unimaginable. To endure 2 and live to tell the tale feels like a paradox of fate, a cruel twist of destiny that left him scarred yet alive. Yamaguchi's survival wasn't just physical, it was a triumph of human resilience. Despite his injuries and the overwhelming trauma of witnessing not 1, but 2 apocalypses, he went on to live a full life, raising a family and becoming a vocal advocate for nuclear disarmament. His experience transformed him into a symbol of the horrors of nuclear warfare and the enduring strength of the human spirit. But his story raises haunting questions. What are the odds? How does one person survive not 1, but 2 moments designed to obliterate everything in their path? And what does it say about the fragility of life that one man could endure so much while hundreds of thousands perished? Yamaguchi's tale isn't just about survival. It's about the randomness of fate, the incomprehensible scope of human suffering, and the resilience it takes to rebuild in the face of unimaginable loss. It forces us to confront the fragility of our existence and the devastating power we've unleashed upon ourselves. Yet, it also serves as a reminder of hope. Yamaguchi didn't let the destruction define him. Instead, he used his life to fight for peace, to ensure that no one else would endure the horrors he had witnessed. He became a living testament to the power of survival, resilience, and the human capacity to turn pain into purpose. So the next time you hear about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, think of Tsutomu Yamaguchi. Think of the man who faced death twice and walked away both times, and think of the paradox of his life, not just a story of unimaginable tragedy, but also one of incredible strength, determination, and hope for a better world. Vikings arrived in America before Columbus. Picture this. It's the year 1000, nearly 500 years before Columbus set sail, and a sturdy wooden ship with a dragon's head carved into its prow cuts through the icy waters of the Atlantic. On board, Viking explorer Leif Erikson gazes at the unfamiliar coastline of North America, a land he would call Vinland. Long before the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria ever set their sails, the Vikings had already arrived in the New World. For centuries, we've been told the story of Columbus as the trailblazer who discovered America. But the truth is, the Vikings beat him to it by almost half a millennium, and they didn't just stumble upon it. They made it, they landed, and they even built settlements. These fearless Norsemen were not only master sailors, but also audacious explorers who pushed the limits of their known world. Erikson's journey to America wasn't a random accident. The Vikings were already well-versed in long-distance voyages, having sailed to Greenland under Leif's father, Eric the Red, and even farther to Iceland before that. Leif had heard stories of a mysterious land west of Greenland, possibly from another Norseman, Bjarni Herjolfsson, who had sighted unknown shores but never landed. Fueled by curiosity and ambition, Leif gathered a crew and set out to explore. What he found was astonishing: a fertile land with rolling meadows, rivers teeming with fish, and forests abundant with timber. To the Vikings, this was paradise. They called it Vinland, possibly because of the wild grapes they found growing there. The exact location of Vinland is debated, but archaeological evidence points to a Viking settlement at L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada, a UNESCO World Heritage Site that confirms their presence. But here's where history gets complicated. The Viking presence in North America was short-lived. While they may have been fierce warriors, their settlements were no match for the harsh environment and resistance from indigenous peoples. The Norse abandoned Vinland after only a few years, retreating to Greenland and Iceland, leaving behind tantalizing traces of their bold journey. Think about that for a moment. The Vikings, with their simple tools and wooden ships, managed to cross the Atlantic and reach North America centuries before Columbus. Their journey was no less remarkable, no less daring. Yet, for so long, their story was overshadowed, almost forgotten. It wasn't until the 20th century that the discovery of Norse artifacts in Newfoundland confirmed what sagas and oral traditions had claimed all along. The Vikings were the true first Europeans in the Americas. But why does this matter? It's not just about correcting a historical record. It's about understanding the human spirit of exploration. The Vikings remind us that curiosity, ambition, and courage have always driven people to push the boundaries of the known world. Their story challenges the linear narrative of history, showing us that progress is often messy, nonlinear, and filled with forgotten chapters. Leif Erikson's voyage also reminds us that the discovery of America was never really a discovery at all. Indigenous peoples had been living on these lands for tens of thousands of years before the Vikings arrived, and they continued to thrive long after the Norse left. The idea that anyone could discover a land already inhabited is, in itself, a paradox, And yet, Leif's story is still worth celebrating, not because he discovered America, but because he embodies the human drive to explore, to question, and to dare. His journey across the Atlantic wasn't just about reaching new shores. It was about challenging limits, taking risks, and leaving a legacy that, while almost forgotten, still resonates today. So, the next time you think about Columbus, remember Leif Erikson. Remember the man who braved uncharted seas, long before compasses and maps, guided only by the stars and his belief in what lay beyond the horizon. And remember the Vikings, whose ships carved paths through icy waters to a land they would never truly claim, but forever mark as proof of humanity's restless, unyielding spirit. The shortest war in history lasted 38 minutes. Wars are often remembered for their brutality, their drawn-out battles, and the heavy toll they take on nations and people. But then there's the Anglo-Zanzibar War of 1896, a conflict so brief it could have unfolded in the time it takes you to brew a pot of coffee. In just 38 to 45 minutes, it was over, securing its place in history as the shortest war ever recorded. The story begins on the island of Zanzibar, off the coast of East Africa, in the waning days of the 19th century. The British Empire, expanding its influence and dominance, had established a protectorate over Zanzibar, exerting control over its politics and trade. When the pro-British Sultan Hamad bin Thawani suddenly died, his successor, Khalid bin Bargash, seized power without British approval. Khalid had no intention of playing puppet to the empire and declared himself the new sultan. But the British were not about to let this challenge go unanswered. They issued an ultimatum. Khalid must step down and vacate the palace by 9 a.m. on August 27, 1896, or face the consequences. Khalid, perhaps underestimating the resolve of his opponents, barricaded himself in the palace with a few hundred loyal men, a modest artillery setup, and a royal yacht anchored in the harbor. At 9:02 a.m., the deadline passed. The British, true to their word, opened fire. From warships anchored in the harbor, they unleashed a barrage of shells that tore through the Sultan's palace, reducing it to rubble within minutes. Khalid's forces, outgunned and overwhelmed, scrambled to return fire, but achieved little more than token resistance. By 9:40 a.m., the war was effectively over. Khalid had fled, seeking asylum at the German consulate, while his remaining forces surrendered. The British raised their flag over Zanzibar, installing a more cooperative sultan in Khalid's place. The entire affair lasted no longer than the time it takes to watch an episode of your favorite show. The brevity of the conflict is almost comical, but its implications were anything but. The war solidified British dominance over Zanzibar and underscored the imbalance of power between colonial empires and smaller, less-equipped states. It was a stark reminder of how quickly imperial might could crush local resistance, leaving no room for negotiation or compromise. But the absurdity of a 38-minute war also invites reflection. Wars are typically drawn-out affairs, marked by long campaigns, sieges, and political maneuvering. This one, however, was over almost before it began, a flash in the historical record that stands in sharp contrast to the prolonged devastation we associate with conflict. Think about it. An entire war waged, fought, and concluded in the span of a coffee break. Soldiers barely had time to fire their weapons before the fighting stopped. The Sultan's palace, once a symbol of power, was reduced to rubble in minutes. And the fate of a nation shifted as swiftly as the clock struck 9:40. Yet, despite its brevity, the Anglo-Zanzibar War encapsulates the essence of power dynamics during the Age of Empire. It wasn't a war of equals. It was a one-sided demonstration of military superiority. It reminds us of the ruthlessness of imperialism, where diplomacy often came second to displays of force. But there's also a strange, almost dark humor to the event. The shortest war in history feels like a contradiction, a paradox that challenges the very nature of what we think a war should be. It raises the question, can something so brief truly be called a war? Or was it more of a violent ultimatum, a single act of destruction dressed up as a military campaign? In the end, the Anglo-Zanzibar War is both a historical oddity and a sobering lesson. It's a reminder that the balance of power can shift in moments, that resistance against overwhelming force often leads to tragedy, and that sometimes history's most remarkable events are over before they even seem real. So the next time you glance at the clock, remember Zanzibar's 38-minute war, a blink of history, but one with a lasting legacy. The original Olympic athletes competed naked. Picture yourself in ancient Greece, standing in the crowded stadium of Olympia. The air buzzes with excitement as spectators gather to witness feats of strength, speed, and skill. But here's the twist. As the athletes take their places, they are completely, unapologetically naked. Not a stitch of clothing in sight, just bare skin glistening in the sun. Every muscle on display, every movement an ode to the human form. Yes, the original Olympic Games were a celebration of athleticism in its purest, most unadorned state. Competing in the nude wasn't just a quirky tradition, it was a deeply symbolic act. The ancient Greeks believed that the human body was a divine creation, a masterpiece crafted by the gods. By competing without clothing, athletes paid homage to the gods, particularly Zeus, the patron deity of the games, while showcasing their physical excellence as a reflection of divine beauty. Nudity also symbolized equality. Stripped of all material possessions, athletes competed not as wealthy elites or humble commoners, but as equals. Victory wasn't about what you wore or what you owned. It was about your strength, skill, and dedication. But this wasn't just about philosophy. The practicalities of competing naked had their own advantages. Imagine running, wrestling, or throwing a discus without the encumbrance of heavy, restrictive garments. Athletes needed full range of motion, and in a world without modern sportswear, going nude was the best way to achieve that freedom. Of course, this openness wasn't without its challenges. Competing naked meant exposing yourself not just to the eyes of the crowd, but also to the elements. Dust, heat, and rough terrain added layers of difficulty to already grueling events. Yet, these obstacles only heightened the glory of victory, proving not just your physical prowess, but your resilience. The tradition of competing naked was so central to Greek culture that the word gymnasium itself comes from the Greek word gymnos, meaning naked. Gymnasiums weren't just places for exercise. They were spaces where the pursuit of physical and intellectual excellence intertwined, a holistic approach to training body and mind. But nudity in the ancient Olympics wasn't universally embraced. Women, for example, were largely excluded from participating or even spectating. Married women were strictly prohibited from attending the games, under penalty of death. The one exception was the priestess of Demeter, who had the honor of observing the events. And yet, there were moments when women defied the rules. One famous story tells of Kalipatera, a widow who disguised herself as a man to watch her son compete. When her identity was discovered, she was spared punishment due to her family's history of Olympic champions. Still, her bold act led to stricter enforcement of the rules, with all trainers required to be naked as well to prevent future disguises. The nudity of ancient Olympians might seem shocking or even humorous to us today, but it was anything but frivolous. It was a profound statement about the human spirit, a belief that the body was not something to be hidden or ashamed of, but something to be celebrated, a temple of strength, beauty, and divine potential. And isn't it fascinating how much has changed since those early games? Today, athletes are clad in high-tech gear designed for maximum performance. We marvel at aerodynamic suits, moisture-wicking fabrics, and cutting-edge footwear. But the ancient Greeks didn't need all that. Their focus wasn't on technology, but on the raw power of the human body, unfiltered and unadorned. So the next time you watch the Olympics, think of those ancient athletes. Think of their bravery, their confidence, and their unyielding belief in the power of the human form. And remember that beneath all the modern trapping of sport, the essence of competition remains the same, a celebration of human potential, pushing the limits of what we can achieve, and doing so, if necessary, with nothing to hide. The Colosseum was once filled with water for mock naval battles. Imagine standing in the Grand Colosseum, surrounded by 50,000 cheering Romans. The sun blazes down on the massive amphitheater, but instead of gladiators clashing on the sandy arena floor, you see shimmering water. A small lake has been conjured where there was once solid ground, and floating on it are warships, their oars slicing through the waves. Welcome to one of the most extravagant spectacles of ancient Rome, mock naval battles, or naumachii, staged inside the Colosseum itself. It sounds impossible, doesn't it? How could the Romans, with their ancient technology, transform a solid arena into a massive pool deep enough to float full-size ships? But this is Rome we're talking about, the empire that built aqueducts to bring water across mountains and engineered concrete structures that still stand today. The Colosseum wasn't just a place for blood sport, it was a marvel of ingenuity, capable of hosting spectacles so grand they bordered on the absurd. To pull off these mock naval battles, the Romans would flood the Colosseum using a complex system of aqueducts and drainage channels. The arena floor was designed to be watertight, holding enough water to accommodate ships and simulate a sea battle. The crowd would watch in awe as soldiers, dressed as sailors, reenacted famous naval victories or fictional skirmishes. The battles were complete with ramming maneuvers, sinking ships, and hand-to-hand combat on makeshift decks. These naumachii weren't just entertainment, they were propaganda. The Romans loved to flaunt their engineering prowess, their naval dominance, and their ability to conquer nature itself. What better way to demonstrate the might of the empire than to bring the sea into the heart of the city and turn warfare into theater? But these spectacles weren't without their challenges. Flooding the Colosseum was a monumental task that required incredible resources and manpower. Ships had to be built or transported, water carefully managed, and performers trained for both combat and water survival. And yet, the Romans embraced the challenge. For them, no expense was too great in the pursuit of awe-inspiring grandeur. However, as impressive as these naval battles were, they didn't last long. By the late 1st century CE, the Colosseum's design was modified and a permanent arena floor was installed, making flooding impossible. The Namakei were moved to other venues or abandoned altogether, leaving these watery spectacles as a short-lived but unforgettable chapter in Roman history. And isn't that the paradox of the Colosseum? It's a symbol of human ingenuity and excess, a place where art, architecture, and brutality collided. On one hand, it was a marvel of engineering, capable of transforming into a sea for naval battles. On the other, it was a stage for violence, where lives were sacrificed for the amusement of the masses. But the Namakei also remind us of the Roman mindset, a relentless drive to conquer not just their enemies, but the very limits of possibility. They didn't ask whether they could flood the Colosseum. They simply did it. They didn't settle for telling stories of naval victories. They recreated them with real ships and real soldiers. So, the next time you picture the Colosseum, don't just think of gladiators or roaring lions. Think of it as a place where the impossible became reality, a stage not just for combat, but for human ambition in its most extravagant form. Because in Rome, even the sea could be brought to heel, if only for a moment. The Titanic's lookout had no binoculars. The Titanic, the so-called unsinkable ship, met its infamous fate on a cold April night in 1912, colliding with an iceberg in the frigid North Atlantic. But what if I told you that one small, almost laughable oversight might have sealed its doom? The lookouts on duty that night, those tasked with spotting hazards in the icy waters, had no binoculars. None. It wasn't because they didn't want them. The binoculars existed, tucked away in a locker aboard the ship. But the key to that locker? It never made it on board. The story begins before the Titanic's maiden voyage, during a seemingly minor crew reshuffle. Second Officer David Blair, originally assigned to the Titanic, was reassigned to another ship at the last minute. In the rush of his departure, Blair inadvertently took the key to the binocular locker with him. It was a small, simple oversight, but one with catastrophic consequences. As a result, the lookout crew was left to rely solely on their naked eyes to scan the dark, icy waters for obstacles. No magnification, no advantage, just human vision against the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Atlantic. And on that fateful night, as the Titanic sped forward at nearly full speed, the iceberg loomed unseen until it was far too late. Think about it for a moment. A ship hailed as the pinnacle of human engineering, a floating palace outfitted with luxury beyond imagination, was undone by something as mundane as a missing key. It's a paradox that leaves you shaking your head. How could such a monumental tragedy hinge on something so small? The absence of binoculars may not have been the sole cause of the disaster, but it was undoubtedly a critical factor. With binoculars, the iceberg might have been spotted earlier, giving the crew precious extra seconds to react. A slight turn of the wheel, a fraction more time. These tiny differences could have meant avoiding the iceberg altogether. Instead, the Titanic struck the iceberg at 11:40 p.m., tearing a gash in its side that doomed the ship and claimed over 1,500 lives. The tragedy of the Titanic is often framed as a story of hubris, humanity's overconfidence in its ability to conquer nature. But the missing binoculars add another layer, the fragility of even the most ambitious plans. It wasn't just the iceberg or the ship's speed or the shortage of lifeboats. It was also a small, seemingly inconsequential mistake, a reminder that even the grandest designs can unravel from the tiniest thread. And isn't that the haunting truth of it all? The Titanic wasn't undone by a single catastrophic error. but by a chain of small missteps and oversights, the missing key, the lack of lifeboats, the ignored iceberg warnings. Together, they created the perfect storm of failure. But the missing binoculars also reflect something deeply human, the way we often overlook the details in our rush toward bigger goals. It's easy to imagine the crew, busy with the grandeur and excitement of launching the Titanic, brushing aside the small matter of a locked locker. It's just one detail, after all. Yet, history has a way of reminding us that details matter. One lost key, one forgotten precaution, one overlooked piece of equipment can cascade into disaster. So the next time you think of the Titanic, don't just picture the gleaming chandeliers or the grand staircase. Picture the lookouts, straining their eyes in the cold night air, scanning the dark horizon with nothing but their naked vision. Picture the key, forgotten in a pocket far from the ship, a tiny, ordinary object that became the missing link in a chain of tragedy. And let it be a lesson, not just in the fragility of human ambition, but in the importance of the small things, the details that seem insignificant until they're not. Because sometimes the difference between safety and disaster is no bigger than the key to a locker. There was a war over a bucket. Wars have been fought over land, power, religion, and resources. But a bucket, yes. In 1325, two Italian city-states, Bologna and Modena, went to war over a wooden bucket. It sounds absurd, almost comical, yet this conflict, the War of the Oaken Bucket, was as real and bloody as any war in history. The story begins with a rivalry that had already been simmering for centuries. Bologna and Modena, neighboring cities in northern Italy, were bitter enemies, divided by political allegiance and pride. Bologna supported the papacy, while Modena backed the Holy Roman Emperor. Their rivalry had led to skirmishes before, but in 1325, the spark that ignited outright war was shockingly trivial. Modenese soldiers stole a wooden bucket from a well in Bologna. This wasn't just any bucket. To the people of Bologna, it symbolized their city's honor, and its theft was a deliberate insult. Modena, on the other hand, wasn't about to give it back. To them, the bucket was a trophy, a reminder of their victory in a petty but satisfying act of defiance. What began as a prank escalated into a full-scale war. Thousands of soldiers from both sides took to the battlefield, clashing in a brutal conflict that culminated in the Battle of Zappolino. Despite Bologna's larger army, Modena emerged victorious, and their troops even went so far as to march into Bologna's territory before retreating triumphantly, bucket in hand. The bucket remained in Modena, displayed as a symbol of their victory, where it still resides today in the Torre della Ghirlandina, a bell tower in the heart of the city. And while the war itself didn't dramatically alter the political landscape of Italy, it became a lasting testament to how even the smallest provocations can escalate into chaos. But the War of the Oaken Bucket wasn't really about the bucket, was it? The stolen bucket was just the excuse, the spark that ignited tensions already primed to explode. The real causes lay in the deeper divisions between the two city-states, their opposing loyalties, their fierce pride, and their desire to assert dominance over one another. The bucket simply became the face of a conflict that had been brewing for years. And isn't that the paradox of human conflict? Wars often start over something seemingly insignificant, yet they reveal the underlying forces that truly drive us: pride, rivalry, fear, and the refusal to back down. The War of the Oaken Bucket wasn't fought for the bucket itself, but for what it represented: power, honor, and the unyielding need to win. It's easy to laugh at the absurdity of it all. A wooden bucket sparking a war sounds like something out of a farce, not a history book. But perhaps that's why the story resonates. It's a reminder of how easily small disputes can spiral into something far greater, especially when pride and politics are involved. At the same time, the war has a strange kind of charm. In a world where conflicts often stem from devastating causes, there's something almost refreshing about a war fought over something so trivial. It's as if history itself took a moment to show its sense of humor, even in the midst of bloodshed. So the next time you hear about a petty argument or a trivial grudge, think of the War of the Oaken Bucket. Think of how one stolen pail became a symbol of a city's pride, a rallying cry for soldiers, and a lasting artifact of human stubbornness. And maybe, just maybe, take a moment to let the small things go. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that sometimes the smallest provocations lead to the biggest battles. And sometimes the only winner in a war is the bucket, aka le Soleil. Chicken lived for 18 months without a head. It sounds like a gruesome campfire story or a bizarre urban legend, but it's entirely true. In 1945, a chicken named Mike lived for 18 months without a head. Yes, a headless chicken. Not only did Mike survive, but he thrived, becoming a sideshow sensation and baffling scientists along the way. The story begins on a farm in Fruita, Colorado. A farmer named Lloyd Olson was preparing a chicken dinner, and, as farmers do, he chopped off the head of a 5.5-month-old rooster. Normally that would be the end of the story, but Mike had other plans. To everyone's shock, the chicken didn't keel over. Instead, it stood up, wobbled a bit, and then began walking around as if nothing had happened. Lloyd and his wife Clara couldn't believe their eyes. The bird was alive, headless, and seemingly determined to carry on. Curious and slightly amused, they decided to spare Mike's life. They fed him by dripping a mixture of milk and water down his open neck with an eyedropper and cleared mucus from his throat to keep him breathing. Despite his missing head, Mike continued to grow, gaining weight and adjusting to his unusual predicament. But how, you might ask, is this even possible? The answer lies in chicken anatomy. When Lloyd swung his axe, he missed a critical part of Mike's brainstem, which controls basic functions like breathing and heartbeat. He also left one ear and a significant portion of the chicken's skull intact. This allowed Mike to survive, albeit without his head. What followed was a whirlwind of fame. Mike became a national sensation, touring the country as Miracle Mike and earning his owners a small fortune. People paid to see the headless chicken, marveling at his resilience and snapping up photographs and postcards as souvenirs. But Mike's fame wasn't without challenges. His survival raised ethical questions and sparked debates about animal welfare. Scientists studied him, fascinated by the limits of life and how much of a creature's brain is truly necessary for survival. For Mike, it turned out, not much. Mike's extraordinary run came to an end in 1947. One night while touring in Arizona, the Olsons accidentally left behind the tools they used to clear his throat. Mike began choking and, without their intervention, passed away. The tale of Mike the Headless Chicken is undeniably bizarre, but it's also oddly inspiring. It's a story about resilience, adaptability, and the unexpected twists of life, literally. Mike, without a head, defied all logic and became a legend. At the same time, his story serves as a paradoxical reminder of life's fragility. Here was a creature that survived against all odds, thriving despite a loss that should have been fatal. And yet, in the end, it was something as simple as a blocked airway that brought his extraordinary life to a close. Mike's legacy lives on in Fruita, Colorado, where the town celebrates Mike the Headless Chicken Day every year with games, food, and a headless chicken mascot. It's a quirky homage to one of history's strangest stories. A reminder that even the most improbable lives can leave a lasting impression. So the next time you hear someone say running around like a chicken with its head cut off, think of Mike. Think of the headless bird that defied death, captured the world's imagination, and proved that sometimes life finds a way, even when it seems impossible. Julius Caesar was kidnapped and demanded a higher ransom. Imagine being kidnapped by pirates, your life hanging in the balance as they demand a ransom for your release. Most people would beg for mercy or try to haggle the price down. But Julius Caesar, he laughed in their faces and told them they weren't asking for enough. Yes, long before he became one of history's most legendary figures, Julius Caesar found himself at the mercy of a band of Cilician pirates in 75 BCE. They captured him while he was traveling across the Aegean Sea and demanded 20 talents of silver, a hefty sum equivalent to hundreds of thousands of dollars today. But Caesar, never one to downplay his own worth, scoffed at the amount. 20 talents? He reportedly said. You should be asking for 50. And so, the pirates, either amused or persuaded by his confidence, raised the ransom. Caesar sent his men to gather the money while he remained with the pirates. But here's where the story takes an even stranger turn. Caesar didn't behave like a prisoner. Instead of cowering in fear, he acted as if he were in charge. He mingled with the pirates, wrote poetry, delivered speeches, and even joined in their games. If they didn't applaud his performances enthusiastically enough, he scolded them for their lack of taste. He treated them not as captors, but as his audience, almost as though they were his subordinates. And yet, beneath his charisma and confidence, Caesar was plotting revenge. He warned the pirates, quite casually, that once he was freed, he would return to capture them and have them executed. The pirates laughed, dismissing his threats as the bravado of a captive. But Caesar wasn't joking. Once the ransom was paid, Caesar was released, and he wasted no time making good on his promise. He raised a fleet, hunted down the pirates, and captured them. True to his word, he had them crucified, a standard punishment for piracy in ancient Rome. Yet, in a final twist, Caesar showed a flicker of mercy, ordering their throats to be cut first to spare them the agony of crucifixion. The story is equal parts audacious and chilling. It's a testament to Caesar's unshakable confidence, his knack for turning even the direst situations to his advantage, and his ruthless sense of justice. Who else could turn a kidnapping into a stage for showcasing their brilliance and emerge not as a victim, but as a conqueror? But Caesar's reaction wasn't just bravado, it was strategy. By acting fearlessly and asserting his superiority, he kept the pirates off guard, ensuring they underestimated him. At the same time, he was laying the groundwork for his future legend, demonstrating that he was a man who could not be cowed, even in captivity. The episode also reveals the paradoxical nature of power. At his lowest moment, when he was powerless and held hostage, Caesar asserted control through sheer force of personality. He turned the tables on his captors, not with weapons or armies, but with words and an unshakable belief in his own destiny. And isn't that the essence of Caesar? A man who refused to accept limits, who saw himself not as a victim of circumstance, but as the master of his own fate. The pirate incident wasn't just a footnote in his life. It was a foreshadowing of the audacity, brilliance, and ruthlessness that would define his rise to power. So the next time you find yourself in a tough spot, think of Caesar and the pirates. Think of the man who turned a kidnapping into an opportunity to prove his worth, who kept his cool under pressure and made the world see him as he saw himself, unstoppable, inevitable, and worth far more than 20 talents. Because sometimes confidence isn't just an attitude, it's the foundation of greatness. Albert Einstein was offered the presidency of Israel. Albert Einstein, scientific genius, Nobel laureate, and the man who rewrote our understanding of the universe, was once asked to take on a very different role, President of Israel. Yes, in 1952, the newly established state of Israel offered Einstein its highest office. The man who had unlocked the secrets of space and time was suddenly faced with an entirely different equation: leading a nation. Imagine it. A humble professor, best known for his unkempt hair and quirky charm, suddenly thrust into the political spotlight. The offer came shortly after the death of Israel's first president, Chaim Weizmann, a close friend of Einstein's. Recognizing the weight of Einstein's global reputation, the Israeli government extended an official invitation, hoping he could bring the same brilliance to their fledgling nation as he had to the field of physics. But Einstein declined, not with arrogance, but with humility. He wrote, "I am deeply moved by the offer from our state of Israel, and at once saddened and ashamed that I cannot accept it. All my life I have dealt with objective matters. Hence I lack both the natural aptitude and the experience to deal properly with people and to exercise official functions." For a man whose mind had ventured into the furthest reaches of the cosmos, the presidency felt like a responsibility he wasn't suited for. It wasn't that he didn't care about Israel. Einstein had long been a vocal supporter of the Zionist movement and a fierce advocate for Jewish causes. But the idea of leading a nation, navigating its politics and complexities, didn't align with his vision of himself or his capabilities. Still, the fact that Israel offered Einstein the presidency is remarkable in itself. It wasn't just a nod to his fame. It was a testament to the hope and ideals that Einstein symbolized. In the aftermath of World War II and the horrors of the Holocaust, Einstein represented resilience, intellect, and the indomitable spirit of the Jewish people. But isn't there something paradoxical about the whole affair? The man who had calculated the energy of the universe, who had forever altered our understanding of light and gravity, didn't feel equipped to lead. It's a reminder that brilliance in one domain doesn't necessarily translate to another, and that true wisdom often lies in recognizing your limitations. And yet, you can't help but wonder, what if he had said yes? What would an Einstein presidency have looked like? Would his clarity of thought, his moral compass, and his relentless curiosity have brought something uniquely transformative to the role? Or would the demands of politics have crushed the very qualities that made him so extraordinary? The offer also reveals something profound about how we choose leaders. It wasn't Einstein's political experience or governing acumen that Israel sought, it was his symbolism. In Einstein, they saw a man who could inspire not just a nation, but the world. A man who embodied hope, intellect, and the power of perseverance in the face of adversity. But Einstein, ever the realist, understood that inspiration alone wasn't enough to govern a country. His refusal wasn't a rejection of Israel, but an acknowledgement of his own boundaries, a rare example of humility in a world where power is so often pursued for its own sake. So, the next time you think of Einstein, don't just picture the wild-haired physicist scribbling equations on a chalkboard. Picture the man who turned down the presidency of a nation, not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much to take on a role he felt he couldn't fulfill. Because sometimes greatness isn't just about what you achieve, it's about knowing who you are and having the courage to say no when the world expects you to say yes. The first official time traveler died mysteriously. In 2003, Andrew Carlson was arrested for insider trading on Wall Street. At first, it seemed like an open and shut case. He had turned $800 into an astonishing $350 million in just 2 weeks by making a series of impossibly accurate stock predictions. But when authorities questioned him, his explanation wasn't just surprising, it was downright unbelievable. Carlson claimed he was a time traveler from the year 2256. Yes, a time traveler. That was his defense. He insisted that his knowledge of future stock prices wasn't illegal. It was simply history to him. At first, investigators laughed it off as a desperate attempt to avoid punishment. But the more they dug, the stranger the story became. For starters, Carlson had no verifiable history, no social security number, no bank records, no trace of existence before his sudden rise on Wall Street. And then there were his predictions. During questioning, he reportedly offered to share secrets of the future in exchange for leniency. Everything from the location of Osama bin Laden to the cure for AIDS. He even warned of upcoming market crashes. Naturally, authorities were skeptical, but his uncanny stock predictions were hard to dismiss. Carlson claimed he had only intended to make a modest living, but got carried away, forgetting how suspicious his actions would appear in the past. And then, just as suddenly as he appeared, Carlson vanished. Before he could stand trial, he mysteriously disappeared from custody. No one could explain how he managed to escape, and despite an extensive search, he was never seen or heard from again. The case became the stuff of modern legend. Was Carlson a con artist, a brilliant fraudster who concocted an elaborate story to escape justice? Or was he, as he claimed, a genuine traveler from the future? The mystery of Andrew Carlson raises fascinating questions about time travel and the paradoxes it creates. If he truly was from 2256, his actions seem reckless. Altering the stock market on such a scale could have had catastrophic ripple effects. Did he knowingly disrupt the timeline, or was he simply a rogue traveler, breaking the rules of time for personal gain? And what about his disappearance? If he wasn't from the future, how did he evade a high-security facility without leaving a trace? Could someone or something have intervened to erase him from history? Whether you believe in time travel or not, the story taps into something primal. Our fascination with the unknown, our yearning to uncover secrets of the future, and our fear of the consequences those secrets might bring. It forces us to confront the limits of what we know and what we're willing to believe. And isn't that the ultimate paradox? Time travel, if it exists, would be the ultimate tool for knowledge, allowing us to see what's ahead and avoid mistakes. Yet, it could also be the ultimate source of chaos, unraveling the very fabric of history with every altered event. So, who was Andrew Carlson? A genius manipulator? A victim of his own futuristic arrogance? Or a hoax designed to feed our endless hunger for mystery? Whatever the truth, his story lingers in the imagination, a reminder of how thin the line is between the ordinary and the extraordinary. The man who turned $800 into millions, who claimed to hold the keys to the future, and who vanished without a trace. It's a tale as puzzling as time itself. The next time you hear about an unexplained disappearance or an uncanny prediction, remember Andrew Carlson. Remember the man who may have bent time to his will, or simply bent our belief in what's possible, because in the end, whether he was a fraud or a time traveler, one thing is certain: his story is timeless. Aztec sacrifices were so intense that blood ran down temples. Imagine standing at the base of a towering Aztec temple, the air heavy with incense and the sound of drums echoing through the valley. At the top, priests in ornate feathered headdresses raise obsidian blades, and the crowd below chants in unison. What happens next is both horrifying and awe-inspiring. A human heart, still beating, is torn from a chest and offered to the gods. The blood flows, trickling down the temple steps like rivers of crimson, a stark testament to the Aztecs' devotion and brutality. This was no isolated ritual. It was central to Aztec culture. Human sacrifice wasn't just a gruesome act. It was a cosmic necessity. The Aztecs believed that the universe ran on blood, and the gods, who had sacrificed themselves to create the world, demanded repayment in kind. Without these offerings, the sun would cease to rise, the crops would wither, and chaos would engulf the earth. The scale of the sacrifices was staggering. During some ceremonies, thousands of victims were offered in a single day. At the dedication of the Templo Mayor in Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, accounts claim that as many as 20,000 people were sacrificed over 4 days. Victims, often prisoners of war, were marched up the steep steps of the temple, where priests performed the ritual with precision. The heart was held aloft as an offering, and the body was cast down the temple's steep steps, adding to the growing pools of blood below. The imagery is almost too intense to fathom. Temples stained red, priests drenched in blood, and the cries of the victims mingling with the relentless rhythm of drums. For the Aztecs, this wasn't senseless violence. It was a sacred duty, a way to sustain the gods and maintain the balance of the universe. But why such intensity? Why such an obsession with blood? The answer lies in their mythology. The Aztecs believed that the gods had sacrificed their own blood to create humanity. To repay this divine debt, humans had to offer their own life force. The heart, as the seat of the soul and the source of life, was the ultimate gift. Yet, there's a paradox at the heart of these sacrifices. The Aztecs' devotion to preserving the world through bloodshed also became their undoing. Their constant need for captives to sacrifice drove them into perpetual war, making enemies of neighboring tribes and fueling resentment. When the Spanish arrived in 1519, led by Hernán Cortés, they found ready allies among these tribes who were eager to overthrow the empire that had terrorized them for so long. The Spanish, horrified by the scale of the sacrifices, used them as justification for their conquest. They painted the Aztecs as savages, unworthy of mercy or respect, and yet the Spanish themselves brought violence on an unprecedented scale, wiping out the Aztec civilization with war, disease, and forced conversion. What remains of the Aztec sacrifices today are the temples, the artifacts, and the haunting accounts of witnesses. Archaeological evidence, skulls, carvings, and tools confirms the scale and intensity of these rituals. But beyond the physical remnants lies a deeper question. What drives a civilization to such extremes? For the Aztecs, it was a combination of faith, fear, and an unyielding belief in their gods' demands. To them, the sacrifices weren't acts of cruelty, but acts of love, offerings to sustain the cosmos and ensure the survival of their people. In their minds, the rivers of blood flowing down their temples weren't signs of horror, but symbols of life itself. So the next time you think of the Aztecs, don't just picture their mighty temples or their intricate art. Picture the devotion, the rituals, and the rivers of blood that defined their world. It's a chilling reminder of how far humanity will go to make sense of the universe, to seek favor from the divine, and to fulfill the promises they believe sustain existence itself, because for the Aztecs, the cost of life was paid in blood. Pablo Escobar burned $2 million to keep his daughter warm. Pablo Escobar, the infamous Colombian drug lord whose empire made him one of the richest men in history, wasn't just a figure of fear and power, he was also a father, and in one unforgettable moment, his wealth became nothing more than kindling. The story takes place while Escobar was on the run from authorities. His vast empire was crumbling under relentless pressure, and he was forced to hide with his family in the frigid mountains of Colombia. It was during this desperate time that his daughter, Manuela, began to shiver from the cold. The man who once controlled billions of dollars, who could buy almost anything in the world, found himself with a choice no amount of money could solve. And so, without hesitation, Escobar turned to the only resource he had in abundance, cash. He pulled out bundles of US dollars, $2 million worth, and set them on fire to keep his daughter warm. Imagine the scene, a man surrounded by unimaginable wealth, lighting stacks of cash to stave off the cold, the flames flickering, the bills curling into ash, the irony almost palpable. Escobar had spent his life amassing a fortune most people couldn't even dream of, yet in that moment, all the money in the world meant nothing compared to his daughter's comfort. It's a story that feels almost mythical, a paradox of excess and humanity. Here was a man whose greed had brought suffering to millions, whose pursuit of wealth had fueled violence and destruction, burning the very symbol of his power for something as simple and profound as warmth. And yet, the act wasn't just a gesture of paternal love. It was a stark reminder of the fragility of power. Escobar, who once had entire armies and cities at his command, was reduced to burning his own empire to protect his family. The same cash that had built his kingdom was now nothing more than fuel for survival. But this moment also humanizes Escobar in a way few other stories do. It's easy to see him only as the ruthless drug lord who terrorized a nation, but this act reveals another side, a father who, in that fleeting moment, chose family over fortune. Of course, Escobar's story is far from simple. His wealth wasn't just a testament to his ambition. It was a symbol of the violence and corruption that plagued Colombia for decades. The $2 million he burned to keep his daughter warm was money stained with blood, built on the suffering of countless lives. And yet, the image of Escobar feeding stacks of cash into the fire lingers, a powerful metaphor for the futility of wealth in the face of basic human needs. It raises uncomfortable questions about the value we place on money, the lengths we go to acquire it, and the ways we measure success. For Escobar, no amount of money could insulate him from the consequences of his choices, and in the end, it couldn't even keep his daughter warm without being destroyed. The story of Pablo Escobar burning 2 million is more than a curious anecdote. It's a paradox wrapped in a flame. It reminds us that wealth, for all its power and allure, is ultimately just a tool. And sometimes, the most profound moments in life are the ones where we realize that even the greatest fortunes can't hold a candle to the things that truly matter. So, the next time you think about Escobar and his empire, don't just picture the opulence or the violence. Picture the flicker of flames in a cold mountain hideout, the smell of burning cash, and the quiet realization that, in the end, even the richest man in the world couldn't buy warmth for his daughter without sacrificing the very thing he had spent his life chasing. There's a town that hasn't seen the sun in over 80 years. Imagine living in a place where the sun disappears for 40 days every winter, plunging the world into endless darkness. Now imagine that even when daylight returns, it's shrouded by a suffocating haze, a perpetual gray that blankets the sky. Welcome to Norilsk, Russia, a town so far north that the sun vanishes for weeks at a time, and so polluted that it hasn't truly seen the sun in over 80 years. Norilsk sits deep in the Arctic Circle, a remote outpost built on permafrost and surrounded by barren tundra. It's one of the coldest, harshest places on Earth, with temperatures often plunging to 50 degrees, 58 degrees. Winters here are more than just long. They are unrelenting. For 40 days each year, the polar night takes hold, and the sun doesn't rise above the horizon. The town is cloaked in darkness, broken only by dim street lights and the faint glow of industrial facilities. But the absence of sunlight isn't just a seasonal phenomenon. Norilsk is also one of the most polluted places on the planet. The town was built in the 1930s as a Soviet industrial hub, a mining powerhouse rich in nickel, palladium, and other valuable metals. The factories here have been belching smoke and toxins into the air for decades, filling the skies with sulfur dioxide and other pollutants. The result? A permanent smog that obscures the sun even during the brightest months. For over 80 years, Norilsk has been trapped under a toxic cloud, its skies stained yellow and its air heavy with chemicals. Locals rarely see blue skies, and when they do, it's fleeting, a brief respite in a landscape dominated by gray. Life in Norilsk is shaped by this extreme environment. The pollution isn't just an eyesore, it's a health hazard. The air quality is so poor that respiratory issues are common, and life expectancy here is significantly lower than in other parts of Russia. The snow that falls isn't pristine. It's often black or orange, stained by industrial waste. Rivers run red from metal contamination, and the surrounding land is barren, unable to sustain life. Yet, despite these challenges, over 180,000 people call Norilsk home. Why? The answer lies in the town's wealth of natural resources. The metals mined here are crucial to industries around the world, and the jobs they provide keep the town alive. For many residents, leaving isn't an option. They endure the darkness, the cold, and the pollution because Norilsk offers something few other places can: economic stability. But isn't it ironic? The very resources that sustain Norilsk are also its curse. The mines and factories that provide jobs and wealth are the same ones that pollute the air, poison the land, and blot out the sun. It's a paradox that defines the town, a place where prosperity comes at an almost unbearable cost. And yet, there's something profoundly human about Norilsk's resilience. Its people have adapted to conditions that would drive most of us to despair. They've built a community in the face of unimaginable challenges, finding ways to survive and even thrive in one of the most inhospitable places on Earth. The story of Norilsk is both a cautionary tale and a testament to human perseverance. It's a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked industrialization, of what happens when we prioritize short-term gain over long-term sustainability. But it's also a story of survival, of people who refuse to give up even when the odds are stacked against them. So the next time you see the sun shining in a clear blue sky, spare a thought for Norilsk. Think of the town where sunlight is a distant memory, where the skies are painted gray, and where life persists against all odds. It's a place that forces us to confront the fragility of our planet and the remarkable resilience of the people who call it home. The Founding Fathers smuggled ice cream into America. When you think of the Founding Fathers, you picture powdered wigs, grand speeches, and ink-stained quills crafting the future of a nation. But what if I told you they were also ice cream fanatics, so much so that Thomas Jefferson smuggled recipes across the Atlantic to bring the sweet, creamy delight to America? Yes, the men who drafted the Declaration of Independence were also trailblazers of dessert. Thomas Jefferson, always the Renaissance man, fell in love with ice cream during his time in France as the U.S. minister in the late 1780s. There, he indulged in the luxurious treat that was a rarity in his home country. Jefferson, never one to resist innovation or good food, decided to bring the recipe back to America. But there was a catch. The French guarded their culinary secrets closely, and ice cream was considered a luxury exclusive to the elite. So, Jefferson smuggled it, though not in the cloak and dagger way you might imagine. He meticulously wrote down a recipe for vanilla ice cream in his own hand, ensuring that this European delicacy could cross the Atlantic without detection. Today, that handwritten recipe is preserved in the Library of Congress, a testament to his culinary curiosity. Jefferson didn't stop there. Back at Monticello, his Virginia estate, he had ice houses built to store blocks of ice harvested in winter, allowing him to serve ice cream year-round, a rarity in an era before refrigeration. He hosted elaborate dinners where guests were treated to this exotic dessert, cementing his reputation as a man ahead of his time, even in the kitchen. But Jefferson wasn't alone in his ice cream obsession. George Washington, the first president, was equally enamored. He reportedly spent $200, a staggering sum at the time, on ice cream during the summer of 1790. His estate at Mount Vernon had its own ice cream making equipment, and he often served the treat at state dinners, helping to elevate its status from a European luxury to an American sensation. For these founding fathers, ice cream wasn't just a guilty pleasure. It was a symbol of refinement, sophistication, and progress. In an age when desserts were simple and refrigeration was non-existent, serving ice cream demonstrated ingenuity and resourcefulness. It was, quite literally, the coolest thing you could do. But there's a paradox here. These were men who fought for liberty and self-sufficiency, yet they indulged in a delicacy that depended on imported sugar, dairy, and labor-intensive processes. Ice cream wasn't just a treat, it was a statement of privilege, a luxury born of resources and power. And yet, their passion for it left a lasting legacy. By the early 19th century, ice cream had become a beloved dessert across the United States, no longer confined to the tables of the wealthy. Thanks to the likes of Jefferson and Washington, who popularized it through their influence, ice cream eventually became an American staple, accessible to people of all classes. So, the next time you enjoy a scoop of vanilla or indulge in a sundae, remember that you're part of a tradition that dates back to the very birth of America. Think of Jefferson scribbling down recipes in France, of Washington splurging on ice cream during a humid summer, and of a young nation embracing a treat that was equal parts luxury and ingenuity. Because sometimes history isn't just about grand battles and monumental speeches. Sometimes it's about the simple joy of a cold dessert on a hot day and the men who smuggled it into the fabric of a nation. The first recorded human name is over 5,000 years old. Imagine a world so ancient that the wheel was still a groundbreaking invention. Cities were just beginning to rise, and the written word was in its infancy. In this primordial chapter of human history, one name emerges from the mists of time, Kushim. Found etched into a Sumerian clay tablet dating back to 3100 BC, Kushim is the first recorded human name in history. Think about that for a moment. Long before Cleopatra, Alexander the Great, or even the pyramids, there was Kushim, a name that echoes across millennia, linking us to the very dawn of civilization. But who was Kushim? Was he a king? A warrior? A poet? Not quite. The tablet that bears his name wasn't a proclamation of conquest or a tribute to his greatness. It was a simple economic record. Kushim, it seems, was a scribe or an administrator, keeping track of barley transactions. His name appears alongside numbers and symbols, documenting the trade of goods in what was likely one of the world's first cities. It's humbling, isn't it? The first name in human history wasn't a figure of a legend or myth, but someone doing what we might call paperwork. Kushim wasn't striving for immortality. He was just doing his job, ensuring that barley counts balanced and debts were recorded. Yet, by scribbling his name onto a tablet, he unknowingly secured a place in the annals of history. This small detail offers a profound glimpse into the nature of early civilization. The invention of writing wasn't initially about art or storytelling. It was about organization, accountability, and trade. Writing began as a tool for keeping track of resources, and Kushim's name is a testament to that practicality. But the paradox of Kushim is this: while his name is immortal, his identity remains a mystery. Was Kushim even a man, or could the name have referred to a title like accountant or manager? We don't know. What we do know is that Kushim represents something far greater than himself. He is a symbol of humanity's leap into recorded history, a figure standing at the crossroads of oral tradition and written legacy. This single name, etched into clay over 5,000 years ago, connects us to the Sumerians, the first known civilization to develop writing. They lived in Mesopotamia, in what is now modern-day Iraq, and they pioneered innovations that still shape our world today, from agriculture to mathematics to law. And in their bustling cities, amidst the trade of barley and the construction of ziggurats, someone named Kushim lived and worked, unknowingly leaving his mark on eternity. What's striking about Kushim's story is how ordinary it is. The first name in history doesn't belong to a god or a hero, but to a person doing everyday work. And isn't that fitting? For all the monuments and myths we've built over the centuries, the foundation of human progress has always been the efforts of ordinary people: scribes, farmers, traders, and artisans. Kushim reminds us that history isn't just shaped by kings and conquests. It's written by the countless unnamed hands that built civilizations. And every once in a while, one of those hands leaves a name behind, a fleeting glimpse of the humanity that connects us to our distant ancestors. So, the next time you sign your name on a document or type it into a form, think of Kushim. Think of the scribe who, over 5,000 years ago, scratched his name into clay, never imagining that we'd still be speaking it today. It's a reminder that even the smallest acts, a name written on a tablet, a record of a trade, can echo through history in ways we can't begin to predict. Because, in the grand tapestry of time, it's the ordinary moments that often endure the longest. A pharaoh's curse killed the team that opened his tomb. In 1922, deep in the sands of Egypt's Valley of the Kings, archaeologist Howard Carter made a discovery that would captivate the world: the tomb of King Tutankhamun, a pharaoh who had been buried for over 3,000 years. The untouched tomb was a treasure trove of gold, jewels, and artifacts, a stunning glimpse into the grandeur of ancient Egypt. But as soon as the tomb was opened, whispers of a deadly curse began to spread, a curse that would supposedly strike down anyone who dared disturb the boy king's eternal rest. At first, the idea of a curse seemed like nothing more than sensationalism, but then the deaths began. Lord Carnarvon, the wealthy financier of the expedition, was the first to fall. Just a few months after the tomb was opened, he died of blood poisoning following a mosquito bite that became infected. The press seized on the story, calling it the Pharaoh's Curse. And the deaths didn't stop there. Arthur Mace, a member of the excavation team, succumbed to mysterious health issues. Radiologist Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, who had x-rayed Tutankhamun's mummy, also died unexpectedly. By the time several other individuals connected to the tomb passed away under unusual circumstances, the curse was firmly etched into popular imagination. The timing was uncanny, and the media frenzy only fueled the legend. Stories of strange events swirled around the tomb. It was said that when Lord Carnarvon died, the lights in Cairo flickered and went out. Carter's pet canary was reportedly eaten by a cobra, an animal symbolically tied to Egyptian royalty, the very day the tomb was opened. But was there really a curse? Or was it all just coincidence? Skeptics argue that the curse was a fabrication, a story inflated by eager journalists looking for a sensational headline. After all, Howard Carter himself, the man who spent the most time in the tomb, lived for another 16 years and died of natural causes. Many of the supposed victims of the curse were elderly or already in poor health. Scientists have offered another explanation. The tomb may have contained dangerous substances. Sealed for millennia, the tomb could have harbored mold, bacteria, or toxins that caused respiratory illnesses or infections in those who entered. To modern researchers, the curse might simply have been ancient pathogens at work. Yet, even with rational explanations, the allure of the curse remains. There's something undeniably compelling about the idea of a pharaoh's wrath reaching out from beyond the grave to punish those who disturbed his rest. It taps into a universal fear that some boundaries are not meant to be crossed, some secrets not meant to be uncovered. And isn't that part of what makes Tutankhamun's story so timeless? His tomb was not just a burial site. It was a portal to a vanished world, a glimpse into a civilization obsessed with immortality and the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that death was not an end, but a transition, and their elaborate tombs and mummification rituals were meant to ensure eternal life. The curse, whether real or imagined, only adds to the mystique of Tutankhamun. His short reign and untimely death left him a relatively minor figure in Egyptian history, but his tomb's discovery turned him into a legend. The boy king, buried in splendor and protected by his curse, became a symbol of the enigmatic power of ancient Egypt. So, the next time you hear about the Pharaoh's curse, remember it's more than just a spooky tale. It's a story about human curiosity, the risks we take in the pursuit of knowledge, and the myths we create to make sense of the unknown. It's a reminder that some mysteries, no matter how ancient, still have the power to haunt us, even in the modern age. Because whether the curse was real, a coincidence, or just a brilliant piece of mythology, one thing is certain: King Tutankhamun's legacy will never rest in peace. Spartans used black soup, made of blood, as a delicacy. The Spartans, renowned for their fearlessness, discipline, and legendary status as warriors, were a people who lived by one principle above all: survival through strength. Everything in their society, from their training to their food, was designed to harden them into the ultimate soldiers, and nothing embodied their austere way of life more than their infamous black soup. This wasn't just any soup. Made from pig's blood, vinegar, and salt, black soup was a staple of Spartan cuisine and a source of both fascination and revulsion for outsiders. Imagine the iron tang of blood mixed with the acidic bite of vinegar and the stark simplicity of salt. To the Spartans, it wasn't just sustenance, it was a test of their resilience. But why such a gruesome dish? For the Spartans, food wasn't about indulgence or pleasure. It was about fuel. Luxuries were considered a weakness, and simplicity was a virtue. Black soup, with its harsh ingredients and unappealing appearance, symbolized their rejection of comfort. It was a meal that toughened the body and spirit, a culinary reflection of their uncompromising values. Outsiders who encountered black soup were less impressed. Ancient accounts describe how non-Spartan Greeks were appalled by the dish. A famous story recounts how a visiting diplomat tasted the soup and quipped, "Now I understand why Spartans are so willing to die in battle. Anything is better than another bowl of that." Yet, the Spartans weren't concerned with the opinions of others. For them, black soup wasn't about flavor, it was about function. The pig's blood provided protein and iron, essential for warriors constantly engaged in brutal physical activity. The vinegar acted as a preservative and may have had mild antibacterial properties, while the salt replenished minerals lost during grueling training and combat. There's also a deeper symbolism to the dish. Blood, the essence of life, held a profound significance in ancient cultures. Consuming it was seen as a way to absorb strength, vitality, and courage, qualities the Spartans valued above all else. Eating black soup wasn't just an act of nourishment, it was a ritual of empowerment, a way to embody the warrior ethos. But black soup also highlights the stark contrast between Spartan life and that of other Greek city-states. While Athenians dined on bread, cheese, olives, and wine, the Spartans chose austerity over indulgence, utility over pleasure. For them, every aspect of life, even food, was a battlefield, a place to prove their toughness and discipline. Yet, there's a paradox here. The Spartans' obsession with strength and simplicity, while making them formidable warriors, also isolated them culturally. Their rigid focus on survival and martial prowess left little room for the art, philosophy, and innovation that flourished in other parts of Greece. They were feared and admired, but they were also a people who sacrificed much for their way of life, including the joys of a good meal. And isn't that the essence of Spartan culture? It was built on sacrifice, on the idea that comfort and ease were enemies of greatness. They rejected the pleasures of the table in favor of the hard, unyielding path of the warrior, believing that their strength would carry them through any hardship. So, the next time you hear about Spartan black soup, don't just think of it as an unappetizing dish. Think of it as a symbol of their resilience, a reminder that for the Spartans, strength was found not in what they enjoyed, but in what they endured. It's a stark, bitter lesson, one that tastes a lot like vinegar and blood. Because for the Spartans, even their food was a testament to their unyielding philosophy, survival, strength, and sacrifice above all else. A war was almost started over a stray dog. It sounds like the setup for a dark comedy. A soldier chasing a runaway dog accidentally sparks an international conflict. But in 1925, this bizarre and tragic sequence of events nearly led to a full-blown war between Greece and Bulgaria, proving once again how fragile peace can be and how easily human tempers can ignite over something as innocent as a wandering dog. The incident took place along the tense border between the two countries. Relations were already strained, with unresolved territorial disputes lingering from earlier conflicts. The border was heavily guarded, the atmosphere thick with suspicion. It was the kind of place where even the smallest spark could set off an explosion. And then the dog ran. A Greek soldier stationed near the border watched helplessly as his dog bolted across the boundary into Bulgarian territory. Acting on instinct, he gave chase. For him, it was a simple, personal moment. One man trying to retrieve his companion. But to the Bulgarian guards watching him cross the border, it was something else entirely, a violation of their sovereignty. Without hesitation, the Bulgarian guards opened fire, killing the Greek soldier on the spot. What might have ended as a tragic misunderstanding quickly escalated into a diplomatic crisis. When news of the incident reached Athens, outrage erupted. The Greek government demanded an immediate apology and reparations, but Bulgaria refused, claiming they had acted in self-defense. Greece, unwilling to back down, responded by mobilizing its military. Within days, Greek troops invaded the Bulgarian border town of Petrich, determined to assert their dominance and avenge their fallen soldier. Bulgaria, caught off guard, appealed to the League of Nations, the precursor to the United Nations, for intervention. The fighting that followed was brief but bloody. Dozens of soldiers and civilians were killed in the skirmishes, and the threat of a larger war loomed ominously. All of this over a stray dog. The League of Nations quickly stepped in, urging both sides to stand down. After intense negotiations, Greece agreed to withdraw its troops and pay reparations to Bulgaria, effectively ending the conflict. The incident became known as the War of the Stray Dog, a bizarre footnote in the annals of history that highlighted both the absurdity of human conflicts and the dangerous consequences of pride and escalation. But beneath the absurdity lies a deeper truth. This wasn't really about a dog. The stray animal was simply the trigger for a confrontation that had been building for years. Tensions between Greece and Bulgaria were already at a breaking point, their distrust fueled by territorial disputes and historical grievances. The dog, unwittingly, became the final straw. And isn't that often the way with conflicts? The spark may seem trivial, a stray dog, a minor insult, a single misstep, but the fire it ignites reveals the dry tinder of unresolved issues beneath, The War of the Stray Dog wasn't about a border violation. It was about pride, power, and the fragile line between peace and chaos. In hindsight, the incident feels almost comical, a reminder of how easily humans can let tempers flare and emotions overrule reason. But for those who lived through it, the soldiers who fought, the civilians caught in the crossfire, the families who lost loved ones, it was anything but funny. It's also a cautionary tale about the dangers of escalation. What started as a small personal moment, a soldier chasing his dog, spiraled into an international crisis because neither side was willing to de-escalate. In the end, it was cooler heads at the League of Nations that prevented the situation from spiraling into a larger war. So, the next time you see a dog bolting across a yard, think of the War of the Stray Dog. Think of how easily small moments can become history-making events, how fragile peace can be, and how often conflicts arise not from great causes, but from tiny misunderstandings. Because sometimes it's not the grand gestures or epic battles that change the course of history. It's the little things, even something as simple as a dog chasing its tail. Russian scientist injected himself with 3.5 million-year-old bacteria. In the quest for eternal youth, people have turned to all sorts of remedies, creams, diets, even cryotherapy. But in 2015, Russian scientist Dr. Anatoly Brochkov took this obsession to a whole new level. He injected himself with bacteria that had been trapped in Siberian permafrost for 3.5 million years, believing it held the secret to longevity. Yes, you read that right. Brochkov willingly became a human experiment, introducing ancient microorganisms into his body, all in the name of science, or perhaps immortality. The bacteria, called Bacillus F., was discovered in the Siberian permafrost, preserved in a state of near perfection for millions of years. Researchers were intrigued by its apparent resilience. Unlike other microorganisms, Bacillus F seemed to possess an extraordinary ability to survive extreme conditions. It was found thriving in the frozen tundra, and some scientists speculated it might hold clues to combating aging or enhancing immunity. For Brochkov, the potential was too tantalizing to ignore. He believed that Bacillus F might contain properties capable of rejuvenating cells and boosting human health. And instead of waiting for lengthy clinical trials or laboratory tests, he decided to cut to the chase. Armed with a syringe and a bold sense of curiosity, he injected the bacteria directly into his bloodstream. What happened next? According to Brochkov, nothing catastrophic. At least, not immediately. In fact, he claimed to feel healthier and more energetic than ever. He reported increased stamina, fewer illnesses, and an overall sense of vitality. To him, Bacillus F wasn't just a relic of the ancient past. It was the key to unlocking a longer, healthier future. But while Brochkov's self-experimentation made headlines, it also raised eyebrows. Scientists around the world questioned the safety and ethics of his actions. What if the bacteria harbored unknown pathogens or triggered unforeseen reactions? What if introducing an ancient microorganism into the modern human body caused more harm than good? The experiment also highlighted a paradox at the heart of scientific curiosity. On one hand, progress often requires bold risks and daring ideas. On the other, recklessness can lead to disastrous consequences. Brochkov's injection blurred the line between innovation and irresponsibility, leaving many to wonder whether his actions were a leap forward or a cautionary tale. And then there's the question of the bacteria itself. Bacillus F survived for millions of years in extreme conditions, outlasting species, ice ages, and environmental upheavals. Its resilience is fascinating, but it also raises concerns. What happens when an organism built for survival in the ancient past meets the ecosystems of today? Could it adapt, mutate, thrive in ways we can't predict? For Bruchkov, those questions didn't seem to matter. To him, the potential benefits outweighed the risks. His experiment was as much a statement as it was a study, a declaration that humanity's future might be hidden in the frozen remnants of the past. But whether his claims of improved health are true or simply the placebo effect, one thing is certain: his story taps into humanity's eternal fascination with defying the limits of life. From myths of the Fountain of Youth to modern biohacking, the search for longevity has always been a blend of science, hope, and sheer audacity. So, the next time you hear about an experimental breakthrough or an unconventional method for extending life, think of Dr. Anatoly Bruchkov. Think of the scientist who turned his body into a petri dish, who injected himself with ancient bacteria in the hopes of unlocking its secrets. And ask yourself, is this bravery or hubris? Genius or recklessness? Perhaps it's a little of both. Because if there's one thing history teaches us, it's that the pursuit of immortality is as old and as daring as life itself. The first U.S. bombing victim was a church in 1916. When you think of the first foreign attack on U.S. soil, Pearl Harbor likely comes to mind. But decades before that infamous day, there was another shocking event, one that's been largely forgotten. In 1916, during the height of World War I, a German spy orchestrated the bombing of a church in New Jersey, making it the first documented bombing attack on American soil. The target was St. Patrick's Church in Jersey City, a Catholic church that stood as a symbol of community and resilience. But in the chaotic backdrop of global war, it became an unlikely casualty of espionage and sabotage. At the time, the United States was still neutral in the conflict, though its sympathies leaned heavily toward the Allied powers. German operatives, seeking to disrupt U.S. support for their enemies, began a campaign of sabotage across the country. The bombing was carried out by a German spy named Hans Tauscher, who was suspected of planning numerous acts of sabotage. The goal? To send a clear message and sow fear among Americans while hindering any material support the U.S. might provide to the Allies. On the night of the attack, an explosion tore through St. Patrick's Church, destroying much of the building and sending shock waves through the community. Though no one was killed, the incident marked a chilling escalation in foreign aggression on American soil. The sheer audacity of targeting a house of worship stunned the nation and brought home the reality that even distant wars could have devastating local consequences. But what made this attack so significant wasn't just the damage to the church, it was what it symbolized. For the first time, Americans faced the realization that they were no longer insulated from global conflict. The illusion of safety across the Atlantic had been shattered, and the bombing served as a prelude to the far greater challenges that lay ahead in the 20th century. And yet, the attack was just one piece of a larger puzzle. Throughout World War I, German agents were responsible for a series of sabotage efforts within the United States, including the infamous Black Tom explosion in 1916, which destroyed munitions bound for the Allies and damaged the Statue of Liberty. These acts of sabotage highlighted the vulnerabilities of a nation still grappling with its role on the global stage. But why target a church? The exact motives behind the bombing remain murky, but the attack may have been intended to stoke division. At the time, tensions between immigrant communities, particularly Germans and Irish Catholics, were already high. By striking a Catholic church, the saboteurs might have hoped to inflame those tensions further. The incident also raises questions about the nature of modern warfare. In a conflict that spanned continents and armies, why were ordinary civilians and community landmarks drawn into the crossfire? The bombing of St. Patrick's Church was an early example of how war had evolved, with civilians becoming not just collateral damage, but deliberate targets in the pursuit of strategic goals. And yet, the resilience of the community in the wake of the bombing tells a different story. St. Patrick's Church was rebuilt, standing as a testament to the strength of the people who refused to let fear define them. So, the next time you think about attacks on American soil, remember St. Patrick's Church. Remember the night in 1916 when a foreign war made its way to New Jersey, not with armies or battleships, but with a single, devastating act of sabotage. It's a story of vulnerability, resilience, and a nation waking up to the harsh realities of a changing world. And it's a reminder that even in moments of destruction, the strength of a community can endure, rising from the ashes one brick at a time. People used to believe tomatoes were poisonous. Today, tomatoes are the heart of countless beloved dishes, from pasta sauces to fresh salads. But for centuries, this humble fruit, yes, it's a fruit, was considered deadly in Europe. Known as poison apples, tomatoes were avoided, feared, and shunned as dangerous to eat. The story begins in the 16th century, when tomatoes were first introduced to Europe from the Americas. They were vibrant, strange, and enticing, but they quickly earned a sinister reputation. The wealthy, who dined on pewter plates, were among the first to try the exotic fruit, and many of them became gravely ill after eating it. At the time, no one suspected the plates themselves were to blame. Pewter, an alloy containing lead, would leach toxins when it came into contact with the tomato's natural acidity. The resulting lead poisoning caused symptoms like stomach pain, vomiting, and sometimes death. The tomato, with its bright red skin and mysterious origins, became the scapegoat. Meanwhile, the poor, who ate from wooden plates, faced no such problems. For them, the tomato wasn't deadly. It was delicious. But social hierarchies being what they were, the fruit's poisonous reputation spread, and its culinary potential remained untapped for generations. The tomato's bad reputation wasn't just about pewter plates. Its connection to nightshade plants didn't help its case. Tomatoes belong to the Solanaceae family, which includes toxic plants like belladonna and deadly nightshade. This association reinforced the idea that tomatoes were more suited to a poisoner's toolkit than a chef's pantry. It wasn't until the 18th century that tomatoes began to shake their reputation. Farmers in southern Europe, particularly Italy and Spain, started growing and eating them more widely. Their vibrant flavor found a home in Mediterranean cuisine, and slowly, tomatoes shed their stigma. By the 19th century, tomatoes had become a staple of Italian cooking, immortalized in dishes like pasta al pomodoro and pizza margherita. The fruit that had once been feared as a killer transformed into an icon of warmth, comfort, and culinary excellence. But the story of the tomato is more than just a quirky historical misunderstanding. It's a lesson in how fear and misinformation can hold back progress. The belief that tomatoes were poisonous wasn't grounded in science. It was a mix of circumstantial evidence, social biases, and a dash of bad luck. And yet, isn't it remarkable how something so feared can come to symbolize joy and community? The tomato's journey from poison apple to beloved staple is a testament to humanity's ability to adapt, experiment, and eventually embrace what we once feared. So, the next time you enjoy a plate of spaghetti or a fresh caprese salad, think about the long road tomatoes have traveled. Think of the centuries they spent in exile, misunderstood and maligned, before finally taking their rightful place on our tables. Because the story of the tomato isn't just about food. It's about transformation, persistence, and the sweet victory of second chances. And that's something worth savoring. A man once sued himself and won. It sounds like the setup to a joke, but it's entirely true. In Kentucky, a man once filed a lawsuit against himself and won. The case is one of the strangest episodes in legal history, a surreal blend of bureaucracy, irony, and the quirks of the justice system. The man in question, Robert Lee Brock, was an inmate serving time for breaking and entering, but during his incarceration, he filed a lawsuit against himself, claiming that he had violated his own civil rights by getting drunk and committing the crimes that led to his imprisonment. Yes, Brock sued himself for $5 million in damages, arguing that his negligence and poor choices had caused him significant harm. On the surface, it seems absurd. How can someone sue themselves? And what does it even mean to hold yourself legally accountable? But Brock had a plan, however misguided it might have been. His argument hinged on a legal technicality. If he could prove that he had caused his own harm, the state would be obligated to pay the damages on his behalf, since he couldn't earn an income while in prison. The case was filed, and remarkably, it went to court. Brock, serving as both plaintiff and defendant, crafted a bizarre legal argument against himself. He admitted his own guilt, laid out the damages he had suffered, and essentially asked the court to rule in his favor against himself. And it worked. The court agreed with Brock's claim and ruled in his favor. He won his lawsuit, proving that he had indeed harmed himself and was entitled to damages. But here's the catch. Since Brock was both the plaintiff and the defendant, he was also responsible for paying the damages. The court couldn't award him money without taking it from himself, creating a legal paradox. Ultimately, Brock couldn't collect a cent, and the case became a surreal exercise in futility. The story is a fascinating glimpse into the complexities and absurdities of the legal system. On one hand, it's a testament to the principle that anyone, no matter how strange their case, has the right to seek justice. On the other hand, it highlights the limits of logic in a system designed to handle human conflict. What's striking about Brock's case is how it forces us to think about accountability. By suing himself, Brock was, in a way, taking responsibility for his actions. But instead of facing his mistakes directly, he turned them into a legal performance, a strange mix of self-reflection and exploitation of the system. And isn't there something oddly relatable about the whole thing? Haven't we all, at some point, been our own worst enemy, making choices we later regret and wishing there were some way to hold ourselves accountable? Brock's case takes that universal struggle to a ludicrous extreme, turning self-reproach into a courtroom drama. But perhaps the most poignant part of the story is its futility. Brock won his case, but he gained nothing. The legal victory was hollow, a symbolic gesture that left him exactly where he started. It's a reminder that accountability isn't just about assigning blame. It's about finding a way forward. So, the next time you hear about a strange lawsuit, remember Robert Lee Brock. Remember the man who turned his own mistakes into a legal paradox, who sued himself and won, only to discover that victory doesn't always mean progress. Because sometimes the strangest stories are the ones that hold up a mirror to our own struggles, making us laugh, cringe, and reflect all at once. The Leaning Tower of Pisa was never meant to lean. The Leaning Tower of Pisa is one of the most iconic structures in the world, instantly recognizable for its charming tilt. But here's the twist. It was never supposed to lean in the first place. Its famous slant is the result of an architectural blunder that began long before the tower was even completed. And yet, this flaw has made it more celebrated than if it had stood perfectly straight. Construction of the tower began in 1173, a time when Pisa was a thriving maritime republic in Italy. The plan was ambitious, an 8-story bell tower standing tall as part of the cathedral complex, a symbol of the city's power and wealth. But by the time the builders reached the 3rd floor, something started to go wrong. The ground beneath the tower, composed of soft clay, sand, and silt, began to shift, and the tower started to tilt. The foundation, only 3 meters deep, couldn't support the structure's massive weight. The builders had underestimated the instability of the soil, and the tower's fate was sealed. Faced with the leaning structure, construction was paused for nearly a century, partly due to Pisa's wars with neighboring cities. When work resumed in the 14th century, the tilt had only worsened. But instead of starting over, the architects decided to press on. They attempted to correct the lean by building the upper stories with one side taller than the other, creating a subtle curve to compensate. The result? The tower didn't just lean, it bent like a giant banana, defying every principle of symmetry. Despite the obvious flaw, the tower was completed in 1372, standing at a height of nearly 56 meters, 183 feet. And while it was never the towering monument of perfection Pisa had envisioned, it quickly became a source of fascination. Over the centuries, the lean grew worse, and attempts to stabilize the structure were both creative and desperate. Engineers tried everything, adding counterweights, reinforcing the base, even freezing the soil beneath it. At one point, the tilt was so severe that the tower came dangerously close to collapsing. It wasn't until the late 20th century that modern techniques finally stopped the lean from worsening, stabilizing the structure for future generations. But here's the paradox. The very flaw that nearly doomed the tower became its greatest asset. The Leaning Tower of Pisa is a global icon, not because it's a perfect example of architecture, but because it's imperfect. Millions of tourists flock to Pisa every year, not to see a straight tower, but to marvel at one that seems to defy gravity. And isn't that part of the tower's charm? It's a reminder that mistakes, even monumental ones, can lead to something extraordinary. What began as a symbol of hubris and miscalculation has become a celebration of resilience, ingenuity, and the unexpected beauty of imperfection. The Leaning Tower of Pisa also offers a lesson in persistence. Despite its flaws, the tower endured wars, natural disasters, and centuries of neglect. It stood tall, or rather, leaned confidently, against the odds, proving that even when the foundation is shaky, a little creativity can go a long way. So, the next time you see a photo of the Leaning Tower or visit it in person, think about its improbable journey. Think about the architects who refused to abandon it, the engineers who fought to save it, and the millions of people who celebrate it today, not for what it was supposed to be, but for what it became. Because sometimes it's the things that don't go as planned that end up leaving the biggest mark on history. And the Leaning Tower of Pisa, it's a glorious testament to the power of embracing imperfection. World War II. Bombs are still being found. Decades after the final shots of World War II were fired, the war continues to echo beneath the soil of Europe. Every year, over 2,000 tons of unexploded bombs, grenades, and other ordnance are discovered, remnants of a conflict that reshaped the world. It's a haunting reminder that the scars of war don't simply vanish when the fighting stops. They linger, buried and dangerous, waiting to be unearthed. These bombs, known as UXO, unexploded ordnance, are a legacy of the massive aerial bombardments that devastated cities, towns, and countrysides across Europe. During the war, millions of tons of explosives were dropped from the skies, often with terrifying accuracy, but not every bomb did what it was supposed to. Some failed to detonate on impact, embedding themselves in the ground and lying dormant for years, even decades. Today, these forgotten explosives resurface in the most unexpected ways. Farmers plowing their fields stumble upon rusted shells. Construction crews hit buried bombs while breaking ground for new buildings. Even casual hikers have occasionally uncovered deadly relics of the war. Each discovery triggers a flurry of activity as bomb disposal teams, trained in the delicate art of neutralizing decades-old explosives, are called in to make the area safe. Germany, one of the most heavily bombed nations during the war, remains a hotspot for UXO. Cities like Berlin, Hamburg, and Cologne were pummeled by Allied air raids, and unexploded bombs are still discovered regularly during construction projects. In 2017, an unexploded British bomb weighing 1.4 tons was found in Frankfurt, forcing the evacuation of more than 60,000 people, the largest peacetime evacuation in Germany since the war. But it's not just Germany. UXO is found across Europe, from the fields of France to the rivers of Poland. In London, remnants of the Blitz occasionally emerge during redevelopment projects. Even underwater, in the Baltic and North Seas, unexploded bombs pose a threat to shipping and marine life. What's truly remarkable is that these bombs, despite being buried for over 75 years, remain just as deadly as the day they were dropped. Their casings may be corroded, but the explosives inside are often stable enough to detonate if disturbed. The passage of time hasn't dulled their power, it's only made them more unpredictable. The discovery of UXO isn't just a technical challenge, it's a stark reminder of the war's enduring impact. For the people who live in areas where bombs are regularly unearthed, the past feels startlingly present. A farmer tilling his field in Normandy or a construction worker digging in Dresden might feel a jarring connection to a conflict that ended long before they were born. And isn't that the paradox of these bombs? They are both relics of history and immediate threats, a bridge between the past and the present. They remind us that wars don't truly end when treaties are signed. They leave legacies that must be managed and reckoned with for generations. Efforts to clear UXO are ongoing, but the sheer scale of the task is daunting. Experts estimate that it could take centuries to locate and neutralize all the unexploded ordnance left behind by World War II. In the meantime, people living in affected areas have learned to live with the possibility of finding a bomb in their backyard, a constant reminder of the fragility of peace. So, The next time you think about World War II, don't just picture the iconic images of battlefields and victory parades. Picture the hidden dangers that still lurk beneath the ground. The bomb disposal teams risking their lives to keep communities safe, and the ordinary people whose daily routines are occasionally interrupted by the echoes of a war they never fought. Because history doesn't always stay buried. Sometimes it lies just beneath the surface, waiting to remind us that the consequences of conflict are never as distant as they seem. Ancient Egyptians had pregnancy tests. Long before modern science developed ultrasounds and over-the-counter pregnancy tests, ancient Egyptians came up with their own ingenious method to determine if a woman was expecting. It didn't involve doctors or advanced tools, just a handful of wheat, barley seeds, and a little patience. Here's how it worked. A woman suspected of being pregnant would urinate on a mixture of wheat and barley seeds. Over the next several days, the seeds would be monitored. If they began to sprout, it was believed the woman was pregnant. But the test didn't stop there. The Egyptians even used the type of grain that sprouted to predict the baby's gender. If the barley sprouted, the child would be male. If the wheat sprouted, it would be female. It sounds like an old wives' tale, right? But here's the surprising part. Modern science suggests this ancient method wasn't entirely baseless. Studies conducted in the 20th century found that the high levels of estrogen present in pregnant women's urine could indeed stimulate seed growth, lending some credibility to this 3,000-year-old practice. While not foolproof, the test may have had a level of accuracy that's remarkable for its time. The method, recorded in the medical papyri of ancient Egypt, reveals just how resourceful early civilizations were when it came to understanding the mysteries of the human body. Without the benefit of microscopes, blood tests, or hormone analysis, they relied on observation, experimentation, and a deep connection to the natural world. But what does this say about the Egyptians as a society? For one, it highlights their sophisticated approach to medicine. Far from being a culture steeped solely in mysticism, the Egyptians combined practical techniques with spiritual beliefs, often pioneering medical practices that would influence later civilizations. It's also a testament to their curiosity and ingenuity. Pregnancy, one of the most transformative experiences in human life, was cloaked in mystery for much of history. The Egyptians' desire to predict and prepare for this event shows their keen interest in health, family, and the future. Yet, there's something deeply human about this practice. Imagine the women of ancient Egypt, anxiously watching over the seeds, hoping for an answer. The test was as much about hope, anticipation, and the unknown as any modern pregnancy test. It was a moment where science, belief, and emotion intersected, much like today. Of course, the test wasn't perfect. Factors like hydration, soil quality, and even luck could influence the outcome. But the fact that it existed at all speaks volumes about the Egyptians' determination to bring clarity to the uncertainties of life. So, the next time you see a sleek digital pregnancy test or hear about cutting-edge advancements in fertility science, think back to those wheat and barley seeds in the deserts of ancient Egypt. Think of the ingenuity of a civilization that, with nothing but natural materials and a sharp mind, found a way to answer one of life's most pressing questions. Because, even in the distant past, people sought the same things we do today: knowledge, certainty, and the joy of preparing for the life to come. And in their own remarkable way, they found it Roman concrete is still stronger than modern concrete. Imagine walking through the ruins of an ancient Roman aqueduct, its massive arches stretching across the horizon, or standing before the Pantheon, its iconic dome and architectural marvel. These structures, built over 2,000 years ago, have withstood earthquakes, erosion, and the relentless march of time. Meanwhile, modern concrete buildings often crumble within a few decades. How did the Romans create something so enduring? The answer lies in their concrete, a material so advanced it outperforms many of today's formulas. Roman concrete, or opus caementicium, wasn't just a building material, it was an engineering masterpiece. At its core was a simple yet ingenious recipe, a mixture of volcanic ash, lime, water, and stones. But it's the volcanic ash that made all the difference. When combined with water, the ash triggered a chemical reaction that formed crystals, which grew and bonded the mixture together. This process, called pozzolanic reaction, gave Roman concrete its incredible strength and durability. The true genius of Roman concrete, however, lies in its ability to heal itself. When cracks form in the material, water seeps in and reacts with the volcanic ash. This reaction creates new crystals that fill the cracks, effectively repairing the concrete over time. It's like a material with built-in maintenance, a feature modern engineers can only dream of replicating. This self-healing property is one of the reasons why Roman structures like the Colosseum, aqueducts, and harbor walls have survived for millennia. Even in harsh conditions, such as underwater environments, Roman concrete has proven nearly indestructible. Structures like the piers of Cosa and Portus are still standing, their submerged portions as strong as ever. By comparison, modern concrete, made primarily with Portland cement, is less durable and more prone to cracking. Its lifespan is measured in decades rather than centuries, and unlike Roman concrete, it lacks the self-healing properties that could extend its longevity. The irony is that in our pursuit of progress, we've somehow lost the secret to one of history's most enduring materials. What's even more fascinating is that the Romans didn't fully understand the chemistry behind their concrete. They developed it through observation and experimentation, refining the formula over generations. To them, it was a practical solution to the challenges of building a vast empire, not a scientific breakthrough. Yet, their ingenuity allowed them to construct roads, bridges, and monuments that still stand as testaments to their skill. The rediscovery of Roman concrete's secrets has become a focus for modern scientists and engineers. By studying its composition, researchers hope to develop more sustainable and durable building materials. After all, Roman concrete didn't just last longer, it was also greener. Its production required less energy than modern cement, and it emitted fewer carbon emissions. In an era where sustainability is paramount, the ancient formula offers valuable lessons for the future. But there's also a philosophical lesson to be found in Roman concrete. It's a reminder of the power of simplicity and the importance of building with longevity in mind. The Romans didn't cut corners or prioritize short-term gains. They built for the ages. Their structures weren't just functional, they were enduring symbols of their culture, meant to inspire future generations. So, the next time you see a crumbling modern building or a pothole-ridden road, think about the ingenuity of Roman concrete. Think of the ancient engineers who, without the benefit of modern science, created a material that has outlasted empires. Because in a world obsessed with innovation, the Romans remind us that sometimes the best solutions are the ones that stand the test of time, literally. And their concrete? It's a legacy carved in stone, a testament to human ingenuity that still holds its ground even after 2,000 years. The U.S. government poisoned alcohol during Prohibition. In the early 20th century, the United States embarked on one of its most ambitious and controversial social experiments, Prohibition. The passage of the 18th Amendment in 1920 outlawed the production, sale, and transportation of alcohol nationwide. Its supporters, buoyed by the temperance movement, celebrated the amendment as a moral victory, believing it would cure societal ills, reduce crime, and lead to healthier, happier families. Alcohol, in their eyes, was a poison corrupting both individuals and communities, and removing it from American life seemed the most logical step toward national betterment. What unfolded, however, was far from the utopian vision Prohibition advocates imagined. Instead of ushering in an age of virtue and sobriety, the law created a booming underground economy for alcohol, gave rise to organized crime, and led to one of the most controversial decisions in U.S. history, the government's intentional poisoning of industrial alcohol supplies to deter drinking. This chilling policy resulted in thousands of deaths and countless injuries, revealing the devastating consequences of enforcing morality through harmful measures. When Prohibition began, the thirst for alcohol didn't disappear. Americans had long been accustomed to their beer, whiskey, and wine, and they were not about to let a constitutional amendment stand between them and their favorite drinks. Almost immediately, a vast black market for alcohol emerged. Speakeasies popped up in cities and towns across the nation. Bootleggers smuggled liquor across borders and coastlines, and home distilleries produced moonshine in secret. One of the most significant sources of illegal alcohol, however, was industrial-grade alcohol. These alcohol supplies, intended for manufacturing products like paint, cleaning solutions, and fuel, were still legal under Prohibition. Industrial alcohol was widely available and cheap, making it an attractive target for bootleggers. By redistilling the alcohol to remove chemical additives, they could transform it into drinkable liquor and sell it on the black market. By the mid-1920s, an estimated 2/3 of the alcohol consumed in the United States came from these industrial sources. The federal government, determined to shut down this loophole, required manufacturers to denature industrial alcohol. This process involved adding chemicals to make the alcohol undrinkable, rendering it foul-tasting and harmful if consumed. But bootleggers quickly adapted, using crude filtration methods to remove these additives and continue selling their product. Frustrated by their inability to curb the black market, federal officials escalated their tactics in 1926. They ordered manufacturers to introduce even more toxic substances into industrial alcohol, including methanol, wood alcohol, benzene, kerosene, and chloroform. The goal was simple: make the alcohol so dangerous that anyone who drank it would become severely ill or die. Officials believed that the threat of poisoning would deter people from consuming industrial alcohol and ultimately reduce illegal drinking. What followed was nothing short of a public health catastrophe. Desperate for alcohol, people continued to drink industrial supplies, often unaware of the heightened risks. Methanol, one of the most common additives, was particularly deadly. Even small amounts could cause blindness, organ failure, or death. Hospitals across the country began reporting an alarming rise in cases of alcohol poisoning. Patients arrived with symptoms like severe abdominal pain, vomiting, convulsions, and paralysis. Many died within hours, while others suffered permanent injuries, including blindness and neurological damage. In New York City alone, more than 400 people died from poisoned alcohol in 1926. By the end of Prohibition in 1933, the nationwide death toll had climbed to an estimated 10,000, with thousands more left permanently disabled. The policy that was supposed to enforce Prohibition's moral vision had instead turned into a deadly public health disaster. The government's response to the growing death toll was both callous and unapologetic. Seymour Loman, Assistant Secretary of the Treasury and one of the architects of the poisoned alcohol policy, dismissed the deaths as the fault of the victims. The person who drinks this industrial alcohol is committing suicide voluntarily, he said, arguing that those who defied the law deserved the consequences. This sentiment reflected the broader prohibitionist mindset, which prioritized moral enforcement over human life. But for many Americans, the poisoned alcohol policy felt like a betrayal. Prohibition was supposed to protect families and communities, yet here was the government deliberately endangering its citizens. The policy disproportionately affected the working class, who often turned to cheap industrial alcohol out of necessity rather than rebellion. For these individuals, alcohol was not just a luxury, it was a way to cope with the economic and emotional challenges of the time. With the Great Depression looming, many found solace in a drink, even if it came with grave risks. Rather than deterring illegal drinking, the policy only made the black market more dangerous. Bootleggers, unaware of the full extent of the added toxins, continued to distribute industrial alcohol, often without fully purifying it. In some cases, they diluted the alcohol with water to stretch their supplies, inadvertently creating mixtures that were even more harmful. The government's strategy had backfired spectacularly, fueling public resentment and eroding trust in its moral authority. The poisoned alcohol policy became emblematic of Prohibition's broader failures. Instead of reducing crime, Prohibition gave rise to organized criminal empires, led by figures like Al Capone, who profited immensely from the illegal liquor trade. Violence escalated as gangs fought for control over distribution networks, turning cities into battlegrounds. Corruption spread as law enforcement officers and politicians accepted bribes to look the other way. Prohibition, intended to uplift society, had instead unleashed chaos. By the early 1930s, the tide of public opinion had turned decisively against Prohibition. The human cost, combined with the widespread crime and corruption it fueled, made the law increasingly untenable. Calls for repeal grew louder, and politicians began to recognize that the noble experiment had failed. In 1933, the 21st Amendment was ratified, ending Prohibition and restoring the legal sale of alcohol. Yet the legacy of poisoned alcohol remained a dark stain on the era. The thousands of lives lost to this policy were not just statistics. They were people, many of them ordinary citizens, simply trying to navigate the challenges of life in a rapidly changing world. Their deaths were the result of a government decision that prioritized ideological enforcement over compassion and common sense. The story of poisoned alcohol serves as a sobering reminder of the dangers of moral absolutism. It highlights the unintended consequences of attempting to legislate behavior without considering the complexities of human nature. Prohibition failed not because Americans were incapable of abstinence, but because it ignored the deep cultural and social role that alcohol played in their lives. The poisoned alcohol policy also forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the role of government. How far should a government go to enforce its laws? At what point does the pursuit of morality become a violation of public trust? The deaths caused by poisoned alcohol were not inevitable. They were the direct result of choices made by those in power. Today, this chapter of history feels both distant and disturbingly relevant. It serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of using harm as a tool of enforcement and the ethical dilemmas that arise when policies prioritize ideology over human lives. The poisoned alcohol policy may not be the most well-remembered aspect of prohibition, but it is one of its most chilling legacies, a stark example of how laws intended to protect can sometimes cause the greatest harm. Prohibition was an experiment born out of good intentions, but it was also a lesson in the limits of government power and the resilience of human behavior. The poisoned alcohol policy, in particular, stands as a reminder of what happens when ideals are pursued at any cost, regardless of the consequences. The lives lost to poisoned alcohol were not just victims of their choices. They were victims of a system that failed to recognize their humanity. As history shows, the pursuit of noble goals can sometimes lead to devastating results. And in the case of prohibition, the true poison was not in the alcohol itself, but in the policies designed to control it.